Okay. That order of business, standing committee reports.
January 16, 2023, Mr. President, Committee Number 4, Education, to whom is referred Senate File 83, K-12 School Facility Leasing, respectfully report same back to the Senate with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Beitman, Brennan, Rothfuss, Scott, and Steinmetz. Senator Scott, Chairman.
Oh, is that it? Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I kept waiting for more after this morning. All right, we are on that order of business, bills on third reading. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, do you have a consent list?
Mr. Vice President, we do have a consent list. I move the third reading consent list, which is follows. Senate File 2, Wyoming Telecommunications Act sunset date. Senate File 5, Medical Malpractice Statutory Update. Senate File 6, Insurance Rebating Modernization. Senate File 16, State Employee Moving Expenses. Senate File 19, Highway Safety Child Restraints. Senate File 20, Driver's License ID Card Photo Quality. Senate File 58, Sutton Archaeological Site Administration. Senate File 59, State Parks Account Agency Expenditures Authority. Senate File 77, Public Works Apprenticeship Program Repeal. Senate File 78, Apprenticeship and Job Training Promotion in School.
Thank you. Would anyone like any of the bills removed from the consent list? Going once? Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall these bills pass the Senate? Senate File 2, Wyoming Telecommunications Act sunset date. Senate File 5, Medical Malpractice Statutory Update. Senate File 6, Insurance Rebating Modernization. Senate File 16, State Employee Moving Expenses. Senate File 19, Highway Safety Child Restraints. Senate File 20, Driver's License ID and Card Photo Quality. Senate File 58, Sutton Archaeological Site Administration. Senate File 59, State Parks Account Agency Expenditure Authority. Senate File 77, Public Works Apprenticeships Programs Repeal. And Senate File 78, Apprenticeship and Job Training Promotion in Schools. Chief Clerk, call the roll.
On the consent list, Anderson. Baldwin. Barlow. Beitman. Beitman, no. Boner. Aye. Bouchard. Brennan. Case. Cooper. Dockstetter. Ellis. French. Purphy. Guru. Hicks. Hutchings. Ide. Jones. Kinski.
Aye.
Kolb. Landon. Larson. McEwen. Nethercott. Pappas. Rothfuss. Salazar. Schuler. Scott. Steinmetz. President Driscoll. On the consent list, 30 aye, 1 no. Senate File 2, are there any changes? Hutchings, aye to no. Kolb, aye to no. Salazar, aye to no. Aye. Aye to no. McEwen, could you please stand, sir? McEwen, aye to no. French? Aye to no. Case? Aye to no. Close. Larson, aye to no. Closing vote. Bouchard, aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 2, 21 aye, 10 no. Senate File 5, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 5, 30 aye, 1 no. Senate File 6, are there any changes? Beitman? No to aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 6, 31 aye. Senate File 16, are there any changes? Bouchard, aye to no. Aye to no. Salazar, aye to no. Larson? Aye to no. McEwen? Aye to no. Hutchings? Aye to no. French, aye to no. Steinmetz, aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 16, 22 aye, 9 no. Senate File 19, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 19, 30 aye, 1 no. Senate File 20, are there any changes? French? Aye to no. Salazar? Aye to no. Hutchings? Aye to no. McEwen? Aye to no. Aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 20, 25 aye, 6 no. Senate File 58, are there any changes? French, aye to no. Aye to no. Salazar, aye to no. Bouchard, aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 58, 26 aye, 5 no. Senate File 59, are there any changes? Case I to know. I'd? I to know. Salazar, I to know. French, I to know. Larson? I to know. Bouchard, I to know. McEwen, I to know. Closing vote. Closing vote closed. Senate File 59, 23 aye, 8 no. Senate File 77, are there any changes? Whitman, no to aye. Closing vote. Closing vote closed. Senate File 77, 31 aye. Senate File 78, are there any changes? Lightman, no to aye. Closing vote. Closing vote closed. Senate File 78, 31 aye.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members. Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 2, Wyoming Telecommunications Act Sunset Date, Senate File 5, Medical Malpractice Statutory Update, Senate File 6, Insurance Rebating Modernization, Senate File 16, State Employee Moving Expenses, Senate File 19, Highway Safety Child Restraints, Senate File 20, Driver's License and ID Card Photo Quality, Senate File 58, Sutton Archaeological Site Administration, Senate File 59, State Parks Account Agency Expenditure Authority, Senate File 77, Public Works Apprenticeship Programs Repeal, and Senate File 78, Apprenticeship and Job Training Promotion in Schools have passed the Senate. We are now back on that order of business, adoption of rules. And Mr. President. Please proceed.
Fellow senators, please join me in welcoming April Ford. She's a Wyoming native, born and raised in Laramie. Then she moved to our good vice president's home country of Sheridan. She works for BNSF, Brilliant Northern Railroad, if that's, you guys don't know that, works as an engineer for the past 24 years. Runs coal and freight trains over 350 miles. I thought it'd be refreshing to have someone that's not an executive out of here that actually delivers the coal and keeps America lit up and warm and keeps our coffers full in Wyoming. Welcome.
Thank you.
We left off at Senate Rule 003. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Vice President, without any objections, I would request to withdraw SR 003.
Without objection, Senate Rule 003 is withdrawn. Ellen, I need that next rule. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Vice President, if you look in your folder, you're going to see the new proposed rules, so if you want to grab those. And there's going to be 2 of them in there that we'll go over, but pull those out right now. So we're going to look at S004. If I could get that read in at this time.
Senate Rule 4, Rules of the Senate 15-7.
Senator Hicks.
So, Mr. Vice President, I move SR 004 be adopted as an amendment to the rules. And for an explanation of this, I'll call on the good minority floor leader.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, based on the debate that we had prior to lunch, our Legislative Service Office redrafted Senate Rule 004, and that was taken up by the Rules Committee and brought out as a replacement for what we had before. It captures and addresses a lot of the concerns that were provided by dramatically simplifying it such that there is no proscriptive prohibition of audio or video recording, either in the Senate on the floor here or in one of the committees during the legislative session, but it provides that the presiding officer, when on the floor of the Senate, or a chairman in any room in which a committee of the Senate is meeting, may restrict the use of audio or video recording equipment that is being used in a manner disruptive to the business of the Senate or Senate committee. So it's obviously very optional in the way it's structured now. It's a may. And that key provision, we had some discussion on this, that is being used in a manner disruptive to the business of the Senate or Senate committee is important because that's effectively on the Senate floor, that would be appealable. And that's an important consideration that we discussed in the Rules Committee. So in other words, if a presiding officer came and said, hey, I don't want you using Senator so-and-so, I don't want you using your audio recorder to record this, it's disruptive. And you said, well, I disagree, I don't think it's disruptive. I'd ask for consideration by the Rules Committee, and then that could be considered, and then it could come back and be appealed to the entire chamber. So at that point, it is up to the body, which is something else we discussed and wanted to make sure that it was up to the body that interpretation. So this hopefully addresses a lot of the concerns. I'm sure it won't address all of the concerns. I spoke with some members that still were not happy with really the need for any rule at all. But I think it's a good, strong attempt in the right direction of trying to tackle the challenges that were discussed. So with that, Mr. Vice President, I or any member of the Rules Committee would be happy to answer any questions.
Further discussion. Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. So just some clarification from my minority leader friend. Previously, you simply could not use a video or camera on the floor until you got permission. So now, is it my understanding that if I come through and I'm taking a video, only if the presiding officer considers it that I'm using my camera in a manner that's disruptive, then he can prevent it. But I do not, with this rule, I don't have to go up to the presiding officer for permission. It's proactive on the presiding officer then to shut me down. Is that correct?
Senator Driscoll.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Good Senator. No, the presiding officer, unless I get told differently, can still tell you you can't use recording devices here. Basically, any ruling I make, you can refer to the Rules Committee and they can rule on it, but I'm pretty free to do that on it. But if you are disruptive, this makes it more clear. It's easier to take you off. It also adds committee chairman into it. So when you're into a committee, it adds stability to the chairman.
Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I read this differently then. If that is, maybe you can help me. I don't believe that this actually says that, but maybe you can help me.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. So the default position is allowance, and I think that's the question the good senator from Fremont County is asking, is if one of the senators wanted to walk in and, film kids up in the chair or whatever's going on, so long as that video is being used in a manner that isn't disruptive, then there would be no call for a challenge. And then at that point, the presiding officer would have to find a fence for some reason before challenging you. So previously, in the first draft, Senate Rule 3, as proposed, the default position was you can't do it until you ask. The way this is written, the default is you can do it unless asked. And I think that addresses the good senator from Fremont County's question.
Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. So if this were to be challenged and go to Rules Committee, the only thing you're really talking about is what disruptive means, is from what I read this. So could you tell me what that discussion was in your drafting of this and what you mean by disruptive?
Any more? Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. That is a correct interpretation. That would be, as far as I read it, the only issue that would be subject to interpretation by the Rules Committee in support or denial of the presiding officer would be, is it disruptive? And it would then be a judgment call of what is or isn't disruptive by the Rules Committee to support or overrule the presiding officer. And then I would remind the body that any ruling of the Rules Committee is subject to review by the entire body. So if the body then disagreed with the Rules Committee, the body is entitled to rule over the top of the Rules Committee. So it is then the will of the body to decide, is it disruptive, yes or no, is what it comes down to. Again, you've got a series of processes, you don't have to appeal, but that is the nature of it.
Further discussion? Further discussion? All right, the question is, the motion, Majority Floor Leader's motion to adopt Senate Rule 004, which creates Senate Rule 15-7. All those in favor? Oh, is roll call, excuse me. Clerk will call the roll.
Amendment roll call, SR 004, Anderson. Aye. Baldwin. Aye. Barlow. Aye. Beitman. No. Boner. Aye. Bouchard. No. Brennan. Aye. Case. No. Cooper. Aye. Dockstader. Aye. Ellis. Aye. French. No. Murphy. Aye. Guru. Aye. Hicks. Aye. Hutchings. Aye. Ide. No. Jones. Aye. Kinski.
Aye.
Aye. Cole. Aye. Landon. Aye. Larson. No. McEwen. No. Nethercott. Aye. Pappas. Aye. Rothfuss. Aye. Salazar. No. Schuler. Aye. Scott. Aye. Steinmetz. Aye. President Driscoll. Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. SR 004 amendment, 23 aye, 8 no.
By your vote, you have adopted Senate Rule 004, which creates Senate Rule 15-7. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, do you have another motion? Here, I'll have, could we please have the rule read in? Yeah, could we
Could I
please have the rule read in?
please?
Joint Rule 2, Joint Rules of the Senate and House.
My apologies, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. Back to you.
Mr. Vice President, I would move JR 002 be adopted as an amendment to the rules. And I'll start an explanation of the genesis of this is actually if for you, if you've got your rules book, if you got it handy, but I'll try to describe. This deals with 22, this is repeal. So what we want to do is repeal section 22-1 of the joint rules. And the joint rules is the important point that I want to capture here. But what 22-1 does, its entirety is sets up a very lengthy and protracted process on ethics complaints. I don't know that this has served us well. It was originally prescribed in 2013 as a procedure to deal with a certain issue that had come up. It set out a long process that, quite frankly, I don't think has served the legislature very well. What we're contemplating here is to repeal that. If you repeal that, you revert back to the constitutional provisions. So the constitutional provisions under Article 3, Section 12 says the Senate and the House each can adopt their own rules. So this is the joint rule that we may or may not agree with the House on. What this does is if we repeal this, we revert automatically back to Article 3, Section 12 in your Constitution. And I'm just going to read the start of that, Mr. Vice President. So, Section 12, rules, punishment, and protection. Each house shall have power to determine the rules of its proceedings and to punish its members and other persons for the contempt of disorderly behavior, and its president to protect its members against violence and offers of bribes, private solicitation, and with concurrence of 2/3 to expel members and have, I'm not going to read the whole thing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the fallback position now is the Constitution. If we repeal this provision in the rules, and then the Senate won't have this rule anymore. With that, Mr. President, I would stand for any questions. I'm certainly there'll be some, and hopefully we can answer those to alleviate any concerns with repealing that. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Further discussion? Senator Biteman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. It looks to me if we were to repeal this, it would prevent a rank and file member from initiating any sort of an ethics investigation. Am I correct in assuming that a subcommittee would have to be formed at the sole discretion of the presiding officer? So if you're in the minority or a rank and file member, you're basically being wiped out. It makes you an easier target, I guess that's what I'm saying. Do you agree?
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. So actually, this is a suggestion that I brought to the Rules Committee. And I've, as a former presiding officer in the Wyoming legislature, and there's another in this chamber as well, and others who are in leadership have had to deal with this rule, et cetera. So the first thing I would say is that no, any member of the public or a member of this body can bring a complaint at any time with or without this rule. Our state existed for many years without this rule. In fact, it's only been in place for 10 years, and I'm sure there were complaints prior to that. So what I would say is, the first, I'll just, Mr. Vice President, if I could, I first brought a suggestion that we just keep paragraph A, B, and J. And that would give us maybe a little bit of structure to say, if there's a complaint, you bring it to the presiding officers, they decide whether it has merit or not and proceed as needed. J has to do with what if the complaint is against the presiding officers, then of course we have a vice president who would take that up in this chamber. Probably the bigger question is, should this be a joint rule to begin with? If we want to have a process to address the matters before the Senate, why would we want it to be, or need it, or want it to be the same or commensurate to what another body that also is housed in this building would also do? So I think there's two things here. One, if this does not do anything, you can still bring a complaint. Any member can bring a complaint. And as a practical matter, though, as a presiding officer previously, found this process was crippling to actually, my view, the due process of the individuals involved and the ability of the presiding officer and those involved with whether it's management council members or investigative committee or et cetera, to actually try to get to the best resolution of the matter. And I'd be glad to speak more broadly. Obviously, many of these things are very evidence and complaint specific. And it is true. And I spoke to the presiding officer who this came underneath in 2013, a former speaker who was trying to deal with a very specific issue. And really what they were trying to get to was a place where you could summarily dismiss. But I think that is inherent in the constitutional language. The presiding officer has that ability inherent in their powers that we elect them to have. And what this did is actually constrain the process and constrain, in my view, the due process and the best process that could go forward in trying to resolve a complaint under this portion. First, I don't believe the process works in many of the cases. And second, I don't believe it's appropriate to have it in the joint rules of the House and the Senate of the Wyoming Legislature. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I think the argument that it shouldn't be in the joint rules is a moot point. It says right in the rules itself that the violation is about the House or Senate, and it's directed at the House that the problem arises in. So one house doesn't have say over the other house in the event that a Rule 22 action is invoked. So I think it's best balanced, that it's fair to both houses to have the same rules, because it's due process. And I would argue that it does work if you follow it. I've been through a Rule 22 complaint in I think my first year, and they didn't like my politics, and the fine senator from Riverton said, "Trust the process, Anthony." And it worked. They went through a hearing, they investigated, and it was dropped. If you read all of Rule 22, and I would suggest that people open the book and look at what these rules say. These rules are written with due process. That's something that's constitutionally guaranteed. You take this away, and there are no more constitutionally guaranteed rules. That's why they're here. They're here, and we should follow them. Some of you know that action was taken against me, and I've not had an ability to clear myself by following these rules. These rules would allow a hearing and allow me to be able to defend myself. That's fair. That's what America is supposed to be. So I don't see any problem with these rules being in joint rules, because that's fair on both sides. All of the action that's taken in one house, the other has to remain in that house. It does not go to the other house in these rules. It's all spelled out. It actually happens in the management council of the house that has the issue. It doesn't go, the other house doesn't get to come and cross the line and get involved. Matter of fact, if you read these rules, they're written very well. I can almost find nothing wrong with the rules, except we just don't follow them.
Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I would just like somebody to walk me through a hypothetical without these rules in place. So if an ethics complaint were to arise, if we were to adopt this motion and strike 22-1, what does the future look like going forward for the next case? Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. Further discussion? Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. So I can't speculate without these rules what it would be, but I want to point out a couple of things that I would regard not due process in the current rules. And if you'd like, I can go chapter and verse. So in your rules, it'd be C, Romanet 4. Review by the subcommittee shall be an executive session and no recording of the hearing. This is also in the absence of the accused. How is that due process? The next one would be 6. If there's a determination, a complaint of alleged criminal activity, then they can actually obey the completion of it until there's something from civil authorities. And there's several other places where I did not feel as a presiding officer that I was able to provide due process, because there were these constrictions in here that I actually couldn't engage by the rules. By these rules, I could not engage what I believed would have been proper due process and in a public setting. Either way. The second part is that if there are these other matters, and in particular, the legal matters, potential criminal accusations, then how does that fit into this? And the way this says is you just have to stop. Well, if someone's activity is impeding interfering with someone's safety or the safety of something or illegal activity, let's say, and it's also not consistent with what we would hope their behavior would be as a elected member of this body, we don't get to do anything, and that's what these rules say. We just have to stop. And so I think that while I certainly appreciate we want due process, and to the questioner from Sheridan County that says, well, what happens if we don't have them? Well, then maybe we should form a committee and let's actually have our own approach to this, and let's actually understand what that due process should be. But I don't believe that these rules reflect what that will be in the end. I believe we will come up with something, if we chose to go that route, we would come up with something that does provide due process, that does actually get to the hearts of some of the concerns that I've heard, whereas I do not believe these rules do. And oh, by the way, that management council, that second step, the first step is the presiding officer receives a complaint. The second step, if he finds merit, he'll take it to the majority and minority floor leader. And then there is the corresponding house's management council. And then if there's a decision, and remind you, this is all done in secrecy. None of this has been done in public yet. The individual's been provided the complaint, and that is it. That is it. Nothing else by these rules has been provided to them. And then if there's an investigative committee, that is done in public. And that is the first place where there's a public discourse as far as the complaint itself within the body or within a subsection of the body. The final thing is that nothing can be done in this entire process unless the entirety of the Senate is in session. Unless the entirety of the Senate is in session. So an investigative committee, you could have gone through all this process. You get to the end, your investigative has a finding of probable cause. This is page 80 in your rules. Anyway, it's all there. It sits there and goes nowhere. And it could be very egregious activity or behavior. And it goes on there because the entire Senate has to be, based on this, has to be reported to the entire Senate. Can't even take any preliminary actions as a presiding officer to protect anything. And that is the challenge as a presiding officer, and I'm just going to be candid with you, that I had to deal with in this instance. So, Mr. Chairman, I would ask for your favorable consideration, and as I said, if there is a desire to go forth with having a rule and bring it into the Senate rules, I will volunteer to be the scribe to get all the right ideas in the room so that we can move something forward. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Senator Driscoll and then Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I guess I've got a question for part of my maybe senior members. Have we ever gone to an actual deal where we got to the process we actually had a quote, quote, trial due process? Because I certainly don't remember it even in the other case. I know we've gone to the quote, quote, secret committee, but I've never seen it go there. And the second's a follow-up to Representative Barlow's comments. I will commit, should we go further with this, we'll appoint a committee to do an ethics committee, and we'll make sure it's represented fairly amongst people, because I truly, if you read the Constitution, it's pretty clear that the Senate follows its own rules, and we're really not following the Constitution very well to bind ourselves to the House. This should be not a joint rule, but a Senate rule. And I do think we can make it better is anytime you don't have transparency and the public end and the early end of it, you're probably going to get a strange outcome often, because it's going to leave it where it's really tough to deal with. So I think it's good to scrap this rule. We'll put it together before the end of the session and try to have a rule back to you by the end of it if we get there. Thanks.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Vice President, to elaborate on my colleague from Campbell County, I think my colleague from Sheridan County was a really good question, and I think it deserves a really good answer. So my concerns is this is a joint rule. But let me explain to you what I have a real problem with. If there is a complaint within one house or the other, who's the complaint referred to? Management Council. Management Council is a representation of both bodies. This is where I get into the constitutional test. We should have our own rules as the Senate. We should not allow the House to come down and make a ruling on an ethics complaint on one of our own members. That should be reserved to this body under our Constitution. I too share the concerns of the lack of due process, again, because I want to read to you on page 81 of your rules, section C, Romanet 2. The subcommittee. This is the subcommittee of Management Council. This is not a subcommittee appointed by leadership or anybody else. Again, this is this extra jurisdictional management committee made up of both houses. Now they're going to go in and start ruling on the factual allegations of the case. So if you read that through, the subcommittee shall have the discretion to determine what additional evidence, if any, is presented during the course of this review. So they get to go out and say, well, we want more information, you know, maybe we do, maybe we don't. That's a subcommittee amount of council. It's not a governing body for the purposes of determining evidence. That's a lack of due process in my estimation. Mr. Chairman, if you go over to Romanet 3, unless specifically invited, neither the complaint nor the member against whom the complaint has been filed shall have the right to attend or present evidence at any meeting of those council subcommittees regarding probable cause. What that says is this little group made up of both houses is going to make a determination of what the evidence that they're going to consider is. And you never have an opportunity to come in there and say, I object to that. They're just going to make a determination of what evidence that they want to look at. I think that's a little problematic, Mr. Chairman. Then you go on to number 6 down there, and I think my colleague already talked about it. But let's look at 7. The finding of probable cause shall require affirmative vote of the majority of the council members serving on the subcommittee. We should not have House members voting on whether we're going to proceed with a process against one of our own members. That's what the Constitution's for. I don't think it affords good due process, Mr. Chairman. I don't think the House ought to be weighing in on these issues through the Management Council. So would hope that we could get an affirmative vote on this. I think there's a commitment from leadership to put a group of anybody that wants to work on these rules in the next month to try to bring something that really indicates what the Senate should be doing and due process. So with that, Mr. Vice Chairman, if there's no more questions, I would ask for the question.
Further discussion, Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. A procedural question and then a comment. Procedural question is this, I'm assuming this JR 002 cannot be amended. It's just voted up or voted down. Is that correct?
You know, I'm not sure. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you. It can only be amended through written amendment. any amendments on the floor would have to be written amendments. So we could pause and change it. Again, it has to all be done today, Mr. Vice President. But there isn't an easy way to amend it without getting a draft. That, again, procedurally, it has to be reduced to writing pursuant to our rules.
Thank you. And may I make my comment now?
Please.
I agree with the good senator from Baggs. I'm not necessarily in love with these rules, but there are rules, and it lays out a process. And I'm not in favor of just repealing our process and our rules without replacing them with something else to go off of. And I like the idea of an ethics committee. That's what I would amend into this. I would say repeal Joint Rule 22-1 and replace it with the Senate shall form an ethics committee composed of so many members. And I think that's something we could all probably agree on. But that's not the case here. So now I'm stuck having to vote either up or down on this. So thank you. That's all I had. And if somebody else is interested in making that motion, maybe we could pause for a while and make that happen. If I'm crazy and you guys want to move on, let's just have the vote. So,
Senator Larson.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Rothfuss? One moment.
Yeah. Thank you for giving me a chance to speak briefly before the good senator. My apologies. I just did want to address something that's nuanced in the joint rule as a correction that wasn't clear. The subcommittee of the Management Council that looks over a specific chamber's ethics violations is only the subset of the chamber that is being considered. So for example, there would be no House members on the subcommittee of the Management Council that would consider a Senate allegation, and vice versa. There would be no senators on the House side. I just wanted to interject that at this point for a clarification, Mr. Vice President, and yield the floor.
Thank you. My apologies, Senator Larson.
Mr. Vice President, thank you. I concur with the good gentleman that brought the last comment. It's in section C on page 81. It says the subcommittee shall consist of those members of Management Council who serve in the same House as the member against whom the complaint is filed.
Thank you.
Senator Landon, and then Senator Hicks.
Mr. Vice President, thank you. I wasn't going to weigh in, but given the fact that I sat on the subcommittee that brought some rules this year, that's not an easy process, by the way, very challenging. We had some good legal advice in the room, a couple of the former directors of the Legislative Service Office. Thank goodness they were there. These are tough deals. I'll tell you what intrigues me, and it goes back to my friend from Sheridan County. I'm intrigued by this whole idea of maybe we can do this thing better. I like the idea of an ethics committee made up of members in here. We don't really have that. We go to a leadership team, and we could treat that as kind of our ethics committee. But so it really boils down to this: do we bet on the come and know that we can put some heads together? Our friend from Campbell County has offered to serve. The president indicated he'd be willing to do that. It just feels like to me, having gotten all the testimony that this isn't working, why do we want to keep doing the same thing over again if it isn't working? I'm willing to vote this down, vote it up, which votes it down, Mr. Vice President, and then go into an interim and get something in place that the Senate can be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Hicks, you'd activated your light. You still wish to speak?
Mr. Vice President, I do think this was dropped on the body here without an opportunity to have any review. We do have time today. I don't think we have to do this right now. So what I would do, Mr. Vice President, is we will come back and look at this. We have another rule proposed here that we need to discuss, but for right now, absent any objections, I would request to withdraw SR 004 to take up for consideration later today.
Withdraw or lay back?
laid back. Nope, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rothfuss, point of order.
I was just going to note that we are on the joint rule 002.
Joint rule. Mr. Absent any,
Did you still want to speak?
Mr. Vice President, absent any objection, I would request that we lay back Joint Rule 002 for later deliberation this afternoon.
Hearing no,
I'm going to object briefly, if I may. And just because I don't think we're done with the debate, if that's okay, a soft objection with no offense, but I think there are a few more points. I had another statement I wanted to make. I think a good senator in front of me does. And I, Mr. Vice President, with respect, would like to hear all of the concerns before we table it, but I do think that the approach is the appropriate approach.
further discussion. Senator Bouchard.
I just want to go back and talk about some of the nuances that were discussed, because it's not really giving the rules that are at hand a fair shake. As someone who has had gone through the process of Rule 22 in my first year, there was mention of this being behind closed doors. And there's a very good reason for that. Because if someone is accused of something, it certainly shouldn't be out in the media. And that is the reason that whole process is set up that way. As someone who has went through this, I was informed in 2017, I believe it was, that it was to be all internal and kept quiet, and while they did an investigation. And that's why that is there. It's very important to due process that someone isn't smeared in the media while going through such a complaint. So and it says right here, the review by the council subcommittee shall be conducted in executive session, and no record of the hearing shall be kept. All records, findings, and proceedings of the review shall be confidential. What's most interesting about that part of this section is that that falls on responsibility of LSO, and everybody involved has to keep that under wraps. In the event that the investigation is that someone is found guilty, or at least has probable cause of guilt, then it moves forward to a public hearing in these same set of rules. So I mean, I think the nuances are easy to throw out there as being wrong, but if you look at how this is laid out, and I do suggest that everybody reads this section of the rules, it's laid out in a proper response to someone making an accusation. And it's similar to when you see things in even EEOC and how those things are handled, that both parties are kind of protected until it's found one way or the other and it proceeds. That's what this is about. It's not about being nefarious and a subcommittee gets to hold secrets. It's not about that. It's about protecting a member of this body from being smeared publicly because someone makes an accusation, which could or could not be true. So I think that's what's really fair about these rules, and I think they really need to be reviewed. And if we were going to make a change and take it out of joint rules, we should have rules very similar to these that are in place, because the rules aren't broken. It's the fact that if we don't follow them. I've been through, Mr. Vice President, I've been through one of these, and like I said, the fine senator from Riverton, who was the president of the Senate, told me to trust the process. And when that process is followed, it works.
Further discussion. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I just had a couple of points I wanted to make before we close. The first is the concept of joint rules versus Senate rules. I think regardless of everything else, that's the appropriate step for us to take as a chamber, is to take it out of joint rules, put it in Senate rules. The whole conversation started with the fact that there was a desire to amend Senate ethics rules, and there was a realization in the committee that we can't, because it's a joint rule, and we have to get permission of the other side of the building to amend our rules. That began the conversation of should it be joint. The Constitution makes it perfectly clear, Senate governs the Senate. And so this was an oversight when it was being passed, regardless of whether we like them, we dislike them. From a process standpoint, we should probably make them Senate rules as soon as we can. So that's one concept. Now, repealing and replacing, or just repealing? We've heard that before. It does make good sense that if there's a desire for the body to find something else to substitute with, whether that's the original rules, which I'll just note, I've been involved in quite a few of these over the years, and I can count exactly one where these rules worked correctly, and it is the one that the good senator from Laramie County has referred to. It worked then. Hasn't worked any other time, but it worked then. Every other time, it just seemed that there was a continuous battle with the language, with the best of intentions. It just didn't quite get there. So, Mr. Vice President, it's my belief that we can do better. Now, the process of how we want to do that, I think it's very reasonable to explore whether we want to generate better rules first, pass those while we're repealing, whether we want to move what's existing into the Senate. I think there are some options that are available. The one concern I would have would be to try and solve it today through a rewrite. Mr. Vice President, that's not going to happen. We're not going to be able to do a better job than the number of hours that went into this the first time, which was substantial, in a few short hours, and replace it with something that is superior to it, realistically. So if we do want a fundamental rewrite, Mr. Vice President, I think it would be appropriate for us to put together that committee that the good president suggested, and get a team together and spend some time really rolling up our sleeves and putting together a better system that might include an ethics committee and maybe some more flexibility for situations that aren't down the center of the plate, Mr. Vice President. So thank you.
Further discussion? Further discussion. Senator Scott.
Mr. Vice President, I've not seen, in the length of time I've been down here, a real case where somebody was disciplined. There've been some accusations, but I've not seen necessity for one of these things to actually the Senate take formal action on them. I understand, and this is hearsay, that about a number of years before I came in, there was a case where somebody violated, a very senior member, violated the log rolling provisions in our Constitution pretty explicitly and got caught at it. And my understanding is the procedure was that the leadership quietly investigated very promptly and told the offender that he had two choices. He could fight it and there'd be a vote of the Senate or the House, I forget, I think it may have been the House. And he stood the risk of being expelled and prosecuted. Or he could go home and stay home and not show his face in the Capitol again. And that was what happened. And it was handled by the leadership, I think, of both parties informally. And that, Mr. Vice President, if we have a committee, and I think that's probably a good idea, if we wind up basically doing nothing, I think that's your default position, is that your elected leadership of your bodies is going to handle that sort of thing. And that may or may not be a good way to do it. I'm a little nervous of a complicated formal proceeding, and I think the joint rule we're getting rid of has that defect to it. You know, we're a citizens legislature. We move fast. We've had over the years very good leadership. And it may be that that's the way to handle it. So that's, Mr. Vice President, that's something I think as we go forward we need to consider. And I think repealing the joint rule, because it's too cumbersome and the evidence is it didn't work very well, most of the time. That may be, I think that's part of wisdom. And then we need to think pretty hard about what we're going to do long-term, Mr. Vice President.
Further discussion? Further discussion? Senator Hicks, you had a request to lay back. Do you wish to pursue that request, or do you want to, let's go to the question then. Question being called on Joint Rule 002 to repeal Joint Rule 22-1. The clerk will call the roll.
Amendment roll call, joint JR 002. Anderson? Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Beitman? No. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? No. Brennan? Aye. Case? No. Cooper? Aye. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? No. Furphy? Aye. Garou? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? No. Jones? Aye. Kinski?
Aye.
Aye. Cole? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? No. McEwen? No. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? No. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? No. President Anderson? Aye. President Driscoll? Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. JR 002, vote 21 aye, 10 no.
By your vote, you have adopted JR 002, which repeals 22-1 of the joint rules. We have one more rule. The clerk will please read the rule.
Senate Rule 5, Rules of the Senate 11-3.
Senator McEwen. Does everybody have a copy of the rule? Senator McEwen, please, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I believe the first step is to move this. So I'd like to move Senate Rule 5
I
to
thought it
Rule
already-
11-3.
It already had been read in, hadn't it? Yeah, it's been read in. I'm sorry. Please go ahead with the motion.
Okay.
I was getting some indications that it hadn't been read in, but it has.
I might be a little confused at this moment.
Go ahead and restate the motion.
I would like to move Senate Rule 005 to 11-3, the amendment.
Please proceed with discussion.
It's a pretty simple rule. Basically, it deals with the Joint Appropriations Committee. As they set budgets up, I'd like to see us draw basically a line in the sand. This is what we're going to spend. If we want to move money from someplace into another, we have to backfill it somehow. In other words, we can't just grow the budget to grow the budget, if that makes sense. The other key thing to this is it would not be divisible either. So as you start working on the budget and you backfill from appropriate areas, we can't just divide it up and kind of make it not work. And that's basically it, Mr. Vice President.
Okay, thank you. Further discussion? Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I'd like to speak in favor of this amendment. The business that I'm in, and probably a lot of people that are in private business, when you set a budget, you try to stick to it. And this budget has been set. I think that the right thing to do is to try to offset it if you're going to increase spending somewhere. I like the verbiage a good senator from Campbell County uses. We need lines in the sand. If we don't have any control and it just runs wild on overspending, that's not what we want here. So I'm in favor of this amendment. Thank you.
Further discussion? Senator Rothfuss and then Senator Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I appreciate the intent of this particular amendment to the rules, but I'm afraid I have some concerns. And the first is that we already have a little bit of a problem, at least in my view, Mr. Vice President, where the Senate Appropriations Committee tends to have a little more control over the budget than the rank and file members of this particular Senate. And that's an effect of the process and just the nature of things. It's hard not to do it that way. This particular amendment gives all of the control because it would allow our Joint Appropriations Committee, our dear friends and colleagues, we love them, we appreciate the hard work they put in, but this gives them total control over the budget, total control, so that the rest of us don't have any say, because once that budget's set and comes to the floor, you're going to have to cut somebody else's program to increase your own program, and it's just a bloodbath on the floor. So if you don't like it the way it came to the floor, you don't get to override that. And Mr. Vice President, I've always seen that as a bit of a concern, that the rank and file members don't have the same ability to represent their constituents when it comes to the budget process. It's a challenge to overcome that. This is a step away from that and basically reduces it so that 5 members of the Senate control the budget and the other 26 of us no longer have control of that. I do not want to relinquish my say in the budget process at this time, and I would oppose the rule.
Further discussion? Senator Scott.
Mr. Vice President, let me start by agreeing with everything you just said. And then let me illustrate from some of the experiences that I've had. An example. I was chairing Committee 10 a few years ago. We had a hearing about a month before the session where we listened to the complaints from the developmental disability, the adult programs there. And they were sufficient that I asked for their income statements and balance sheets because I was afraid we were in the process of getting in real trouble. And when I analyzed those, it looked, as my memory is, that there were 9 or 10 of them, and that if they stuck with the budget as it was coming through, as the governor had recommended, we were going to lose at least 4, maybe 5 of those programs. They were going to go bankrupt. There'd been a redo, but with the health department involved, where the director of the health department had said, don't go beyond this. And they were calling for their staff that actually treated the patients, and these were in the inpatient facilities, was being paid less than what Walmart had posted on its front door for people there. And I was scared to release the specific analysis because one, I would have bankrupted one of them right then and there. They didn't have enough cash on hand to meet all their bills. And they would have been put by their suppliers on a cash-only basis. And we didn't have the capacity to take care of those people that had to been sent out of state. it would have been unmitigated disaster. Came out here, we had a very vigorous debate on the floor of the Senate. We changed that. We got enough relief, so we didn't have that disaster. That's the kind of thing that you can be faced with here. That's the sort of thing where you need to have the full Senate able to reverse, because the appropriations chairman, frankly, in those days, said, they can't make it a business deal, let them go broke. But Medicaid was most of their income, most of their business. So they were going to go broke, and we would have had a disaster. So that's one thing that can get you in trouble with a rule like this. Second example, Mr. Vice President, is when you get a circumstance where you have a big surplus. Then there may be some very creative ways as to how you're going to save. And that's something you want to have open to the full Senate, because it'll be an appropriation to a trust fund, perhaps, or an appropriation to a matching fund for raising funds for, we've done that very successfully, the University of Wyoming. That creativity and how to go about saving is useful to the full Senate. So you think, yeah, this is a way to control out of control spending, but we have found that the Senate as a whole can be pretty responsible over the years and has been. And I think it's a mistake to simply delegate that function to the Appropriations Committee entirely. And I think that would be the practical effect of this rule, Mr. Vice President. So I would hope we would not adopt this rule.
Further discussion? Further discussion? Seeing none. The motion is Senator McEwen's motion to adopt Senate Rule 005 to the rules of Senate 11-3. Clerk will call the roll.
Amendment roll call, SR 005, Anderson? Baldwin? No. Barlow? No. Whitman? Aye. Boner? No. Bouchard? Aye. Brennan? No. No. Case? No. Cooper? No. Dockstader? No. Ellis? No. French? Aye. Murphy? No. Guru? No. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? No. Kinski?
No.
No. Cole? Aye. Landon? No. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? No. Pappas? No. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? No. Scott?
No.
No. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll? No. Anderson? Excused? Anderson excused. Closing vote. Closing vote closed. SR 005 vote was 11 aye, 19 no, 1 excused.
By your vote, Senate Rule 005, an amendment to Senate Rule 11-3 is not adopted. Senator Rothfuss,
Mr. Vice President, may I have the privilege of the floor?
please.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, joining us in watching the riveting debate of Senate rules, and above me in the bleachers is my family. My wife, Heather, and Cora and Finn are up there somewhere, hopefully waving at you. There they are. And I hope the Senate will welcome them. I'm happy to have them here today.
There being no further amendments, the question is, shall the temporary rules and joint rules as amended be adopted as the permanent rules of the Senate of the 67th Legislature? A majority vote is required for adoption of the motion. Chief Kirk, please call the roll.
Adopting the rules, roll call vote. Anderson, excused. Baldwin? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Beitman? Boner? Aye. Bouchard? No. Brennan? Aye. Case? Aye. Cooper? Aye. Dockstetter? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? No. Furphy? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Aye. Ide? No. Jones? Aye. Kinski?
Aye.
Aye. Kolb? Aye. Landon? Aye. Larson? No. McEwen? No. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? No. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll? Aye. Beitman? No. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. On the rules question, 24 aye, 7 no.
By your vote, the temporary Senate rules and joint rules have been adopted.
Excuse me.
Oh, I'm
Should I
sorry.
reread that?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Sorry. 23 aye, 7 no, 1 excused.
Do they have a chance to, did you already do closing the vote?
Yes,
Okay.
I was just reading the results.
Okay, by your vote, the temporary Senate rules and joint rules have been adopted as amended to be the permanent rules of the Senate of the 67th Legislature. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, we are at that order of business, consideration of bills on general file. You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Senator Kolb, the desk is yours.
Thank you.
Majority Floor Leader Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, we'll start that over again. So the plan this afternoon is to work as many of those bills. I want to work till about 5:45 this evening. It's going to be we're going to work a little bit late this week with the idea that if we can get all these committee bills out here, and a lot of these we'll try to get out of here a little bit earlier on Friday. that's the kind of plan to give you a 3.5-day weekend, so bear with me. We're gonna work late. We're gonna work to about 5:45 tonight, and I know that puts a strain on those committees that meet in the evening, but you're gonna get rewarded on the back end, so that's kind of the plan this week. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would turn it back over to you.
The Committee of the Whole will please come to order. First, Bill, Senator Salazar.
Mr. Chairman, privilege of the floor, please.
Granted.
Thank you. Honorable members, I have a constituent visiting the Senate today, up in the gallery here, Ms. Kelly Rutz. If you could welcome her, appreciate it. Thank you.
Senator Larson.
Mr. Chairman, privilege of the floor, please.
Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to introduce everybody. We have former federal Senator Rick Santorum in the gallery. He served in Pennsylvania Senate, at the federal level from 95 to 2007 and was a candidate for presidency. Thank you for being here.
Let me try this again. The Committee of the Whole will please come to order. The first bill for our consideration is Senate File 37. Will the reading clerk read Senate File 37?
Senate File 37, Podiatry Medical Services Medicaid, sponsored by Senator Baldwin, an act relating to the Medical Assistance and Services Act, was referred to Committee Number 10, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes Senator Baldwin, Barlow, and Dockstader. No Senator Hutchings. Excused Senator Bouchard. Senator Baldwin, Chairman.
Senator Baldwin? Sorry, Senator Baldwin, everyone's moved, and I have to relearn the board.
There you go.
Continue, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with a favorable recommendation that Senate File 37, Podiatry Medical Services Medicaid, do pass. And there is an amendment, if I could have that read in, please.
Senate File 37, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 1, line 4, delete.
Before we go to the bill and explanation, I'll work the amendment first because I think it's very important. If the floor will turn to the amendment on page 2, you see section 2. Actually, the amendment starts before there on page 1, line 4. I'm sorry. Page 1, line 4, we delete providing an appropriation, which leads to the more important part of the amendment on page 2, section 2. We're going to delete that entirely. It was felt by the committee that the appropriation was probably not necessary. This was after a discussion with the agency, that without the appropriation, that they would probably be able to do this. Without the appropriation, they could work it into their budget. So I would ask for a favorable vote on removing the appropriation, and then we'll move to the bill after that vote.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, there's an appropriation, there's a fiscal note showing this bill would cost some more. Am I right in thinking, I guess, Mr. Chairman, my question is partly, did they just price out what they're actually paying on podiatrist services, or did they think about what would happen, what happens now when somebody needs some services and can't go to the podiatrist because they're not authorized under Medicaid, so they wind up going to the orthopedic surgeon instead. And those may be more expensive. Is that what's going on? Is this really an effort to save money? Or is there really going to be an increase in the budget, whether or not you need the appropriation, but an increase in the spending here?
Senator Case.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I'm getting a little concerned here because if we remove the appropriation, then who would foot the bill?
Senator Baldwin.
That was a hard one to follow. That was very clever. The discussion was twofold. The number one is the amount that was disclosed that they would need in their budget was uncertain. But number two is that there will be a savings from this that is underappreciated or unappreciated perhaps because of the number of people that don't receive the podiatric care that are going to an orthopedic surgeon, going to wherever for their care, or not going to care at all. These progress to much more disease. And we discussed in the committee some of the progression of some of these folks that don't go to a podiatrist care, particularly the diabetics that don't go in now, end up with much further complications, end up with amputations of not just their foot, but their, from the knee or their leg or death perhaps. There's some really bad outcomes. And in the end, it's felt that there will probably be some benefits, some savings by doing this, by making this care available through a podiatrist, which is indicatively, it's cheaper than going to an orthopedic surgeon. Going to a podiatrist is much more cost effective. So it's felt there'll be some cost savings. As far as who would foot the bill, it's felt that there's probably an uncertainty in what this appropriation meant. And that because it's uncertain, they're judging by how many people are now on Medicare going to podiatric care, and that number is based on that. So it's an uncertain number at best. And it's felt like we need to see what happens, and then perhaps it'll be lower. But the bill may well not be that high. It may not be high at all. There may be greater cost savings than actually loss. So that was the thought.
Further discussion? All those in favor of Senator Baldwin's motion to adopt Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 37, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion to adopt Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 37 has passed. We are back on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Short bill, as you can see, we just made it quite a lot shorter. One of the nuances of this bill, and you've heard this before on the pharmacy portion of this that we did Friday, I believe. But the portion of this that's perhaps more important is the cost savings, as I just mentioned. And secondly, this is more important that we get the podiatrist on this list for private insurance coverage. And without naming those insurances, we all know who they are. This is the list, this Medicaid list is what they depend on when they make their payments. In other words, if this provider, and we'll just use physician assistant for an example, since I'm very familiar with that. If we weren't on that list, then chances are we wouldn't be reimbursed by those private insurance companies. This bill intends to put podiatrists on that list so that now, not just Medicaid, and it's important that Medicaid reimburses, but it's just as important that those private insurances now see that on the Medicaid list and they too can reimburse, because it's felt that down the road, the diabetics in particular will then be more free, or not more free, but more likely to go to care and head off those bad outcomes that are out there. And so that's the real important piece of this legislation, is that we get the name on that list so that all the insurance companies across the board will then be willing to pay for that podiatric care, the podiatrist care, so we can avoid these long-term complications. And I say, we had testimony in committee about the long-term effects of diabetics in particular that don't get that foot care. And we could share stories all day, those of us in medicine that we've talked about the horror stories that come through the emergency room or even into our offices. And I used one that has an eye deficiency, it's a common diabetic side effect, couldn't read very well. He had a magnifying glass that he kept at his bedside. When he went to bed one night, he laid the magnifying glass down, happened to lay it inside of his slippers. Next morning, got up, put on his slippers, didn't realize the magnifying glass was in there because he didn't have a sensation in his feet. He couldn't feel it. He wore those for many hours, developed a sore on his feet that he couldn't feel because of his diabetes. Didn't know he had a sore. By the time he realized he had a sore, several weeks down the road, it became gangrenous. And as a result, ultimately down the end, that gentleman lost his foot. It's something that could have been avoided. And then there's horror stories upon horror stories. So this bill intends to head that off, or at least help us head that off. And so I would encourage your aye vote and get these podiatrists on that list. Thank you.
Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see this is the second of a series of, looks to be a Medicaid expansion type of bills piecemealed out. Does this affect, my question would be, who is eligible for this? Does this change any of the eligibility requirements, or are these people that are currently only eligible for Medicaid as it stands today?
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To answer that question, this doesn't change eligibility at all. All this does is add the provider, the podiatrist, to that list that's out there and available. So those who are eligible for this care under Medicaid or under any other insurance doesn't change at all. It stays the same. This just adds podiatrists to that list as a service that they can then utilize.
Further discussion? All those in favor of Senator Baldwin's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 37, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 37 has passed Committee of the Whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 15. Would the reading clerk read the Senate File 15?
Senate File 15, Military Leave for State Employees, sponsored by the Transportation Committee, an act relating to Defense Forces and Affairs, was referred to Committee Number 8, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Boner, Brennan, Furphy, Kolb, and Pappas. Senator Boner, Chairman.
Chairman Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 15. And to explain this good little bill, I refer to the floor manager from East Central, Laramie, or South Central, Laramie County.
Senator
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What this bill attempts to do, it was, if you'll look on page 2, starting with line 1, going on to 2, we simply strike who has been employed for 1 year on leave for state employees who are also in the military. This bill was brought to the attention of the squad by the A&I that when they have training, especially for new employees, it can be longer than 15 days. So they're just simply asking that our men and women who serve be able to qualify for leave even if they've been employed for less than a year.
For the discussion? Are you ready for the question? All those in favor of Senator Boner's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, to do so with a favorable recommendation of that Senate File 15, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Senate File 15 has passed the Committee of the Whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 32. Would the reading clerk please read the bill?
Senate File 32, Prohibiting Drones Over Penal Institutions, sponsored by the Judiciary Committee, an act relating to crimes and offenses, was referred to committee number 1, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Case, Cooper, Furphy, Landon, and Schuler. Senator Landon, chairman.
Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable recommendation on Senate File 32, prohibiting drones over penal institution. There is a standing committee amendment. I would ask that that be read in at this time.
Senate File 32, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 6, lines 2 through 10, delete.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that standing committee amendment at this time. And for an explanation of the bill and the standing committee amendment, I would ask that you call on the good senator from the Bighorn Basin, Senator Cooper.
Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill was put together by the Joint Judiciary Committee in the interim. It kind of steps out of form in that it relies on a whole lot of common sense. There's not a lot of reason for unmanned aircraft, drones to be flying over a penal institution. There are a few reasons that they should. And what this bill does is gives the definitions of the unmanned aircraft. It outlines what the exceptions to it should be. And it gives the Department of Corrections the authority to stop or prevent the use of unmanned aircraft over the penal institution. It sets penalties and a expiration date. So with all that said, there's been 2 cases already of within the state of Wyoming of contraband being delivered with a drone. And in neighboring states, there's been numerous incidents of it. It's something that's growing, and it's an ongoing problem, something that the Department of Corrections needs to be able to address. So it's pretty straight up. It says that the Department of Corrections shall promulgate rules specifying reasonable actions of a person in charge of a penal institute that they may take to stop or prevent the violation of Wyoming Statute 6-5-214. We heard a lot of testimony from the director of the Department of Corrections. He feels that this is something that's very necessary. It's not a huge problem right now, but they need to be able to address it and move forward with being able to stop this type of behavior. There are reasons for people to fly over it. If those exceptions will notify the department, they'll give them permission, even if it's something as simple as a media wanting to look things over, or some kind of commercial use, law enforcement, emergency services, any of those things, there's exceptions for them, and they will be given permission to fly their drones as necessary. And with that said, I want to talk about the amendment for just a minute. The department has already promulgated the rules. They're ready to go with this, and they ask us to put this in place sooner rather than later. So in section 4, the amendment reads, "This act shall be effective immediately upon completion of all acts necessary." So I guess we probably need to discuss the amendment first and then ask for that's what I wanted.
Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Landon's motion to adopt Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, to Senate File 32, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Question being called on the bill. Oh,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Biden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question regarding the broadness of this bill. I can see the argument where you'd want to make it a crime to drop contraband from a drone, but banning private drones altogether over these institutions, which by definition would include a jail, a penal institution, or a correctional facility operated by a private entity. I guess the civil libertarian in me thinks that it should be okay for a private citizen to be able to fly over a prison camp, so to speak, to see what's going on and make sure nothing bad is happening there. I think the public has a right to know what's going on. I think this might be a little broad, and I think if we want to outlaw dropping things from drones, let's do that, but I think this may go a step far. What say you, bringers of the bill?
Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's a great question by the senator from Sheridan County. You know, I was convinced when we received testimony in committee on that front, based on the fact that they really have no choice. You know, the warden really has no choice when a situation arises where you get one of these drones coming over the top of the prison yard, but to lock the place down, to lock it completely down. I think that would be untenable if we did not restrict that airspace. You'd be locking down the inmates all the time. What the senator from the Bighorn Basin pointed out to everyone is that I think there's plenty of room for requests to be made, that we can certainly expect that our staff is not going to be completely closed to the idea. If there needs to be a surveillance of that for any reason, it might be our state building commission, it could be any number of things. But I think there will exist the opportunity to fly a drone over it, but it's just a situation that we felt like it's important. It needs to be a permissive act. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further discussion? Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm curious about kind of some of the logistics of how this would play out. It makes a lot of sense that if you're flying low over a penal institution and taking direct pictures of that institution, you know, that seems like a clear scenario that comes to mind. I guess what I'm now imagining, though, is a circumstance where you've got an aerial drone that is up quite high, we'll say 500 feet, and taking a picture somewhat to the east, and there is a penal institution there. I'm pretty sure that's also illegal under this. And I'm curious kind of about the specificity in testimony. I don't think that's the intent. I don't think that's what anyone's worried about. But I'm curious if there was any discussion of how specific, and I was reading the particular paragraph on page 3, Romanet 1, which indicates that it's illegal to photograph, surveil, broadcast, or otherwise record a penal institution or correctional facility through the use of an unmanned aircraft system. And that's a big range of things. And then you see that that's punishable in paragraph C by a misdemeanor of up to $2,000. Or it could be a felony, I guess. B, Romanet 3. Nope, that's good. So that discussion, I think I understand the intent, but it's written broadly enough that it feels like it goes beyond that intent. So if we could hear a little bit about what sideboards there are to protect from that incidental photography.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great questions from on both sides of the room here. One, it's important to recognize that not only is the penal institution or correctional facility responsible for ensuring that no additional criminal activity occurs by contraband being dropped. But a primary purpose and obligation and duty of the Department of Corrections is to ensure the safety of those inmates. And the reality is certainly those drones are being used to drop illegal narcotics and other contraband, but also to surveil the inmates for purpose of causing them harm because they have important information or some other type of criminal activity is afoot. And so it's really important to recognize the challenge that these correctional facilities face when trying to protect these inmates who are high targets from other outside larger criminal organizations. And how do they do that when they see a drone overhead? Do they know it's a private drone? Do they know it's just there being curious about what's going on? Or is it they're really obtaining information and intelligence associated with the habits and operations of that institution and the people within inside of it? So really important to be cognizant of that safety and security measure. Concerning the senator from the ivory tower about whether or not we're encompassing photographers, the answer to that is no, and you can see that in Romanet B1, which requires the purpose of photographing, surveilling, broadcasting, or otherwise recording a penal institution. So if the photographer using a drone is up 500 feet into the sky or however far it is, and they happen to capture a penal institution in the distance, but that's not their purpose, I don't think that they would be charged or prosecuted. So I do think that that's the protection that if that was reported and the identity of the drone handler could be determined, and upon inquiry and investigation that the purpose was simply to take a picture of the mountain vista in the background, because we know penal institutions are located in the most beautiful locations in Wyoming, then that certainly would be an affirmative defense to that particular concern. It's a good little bill.
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my question is there a prohibition against flying manned aircraft over penal institutions at this time? Thank you.
Senator Nadekot.
Mr. Chairman, aircraft is always, the law governing aircrafts is the federal law associated with that, and there are prohibitions regarding airspace over penal institutions.
Are you ready for the question? All those in favor of Senator Landon's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 32, say aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 32 is passed committee of the whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 18. Will the reading clerk please read in Senate File 18? Oh. Trying to get efficiency, sorry. Floor Leader Hicks. Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just for everybody's notification, I have changed a couple of the bill orders to facilitate some of the members of the Transportation Committee with their meeting upon adjournment. So I just want you to note that. Your chairman need to look at that and notify the folks that will be presenting those bills. So that has changed in the last 5 minutes.
This is it here?
Yep.
32 is here, okay. Okay. 36, okay. So? 32, right? Okay. 32 is who? 32 Landon.
You saw me
Is it
before.
Landon? You got me all mixed
I
up
think he's a
here.
little overwhelmed. We need those flags.
But who? Did we read this in yet? No? Okay.
We can have
All
Tim
right,
stand
that's
on
right.
his desk. Mr.
The next bill for our consideration.
Mr. Chairman, I'm still here.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you. We're going to get flags to wave back there, make us easier to see.
Well, we
Can
had
I
to-
have privilege of the floor, please?
You may.
Thank you
Senator
very
Ball.
much. I just wanted to recognize somebody here in the audience. I know y'all got an email here last week. I get confused which week we're on. I think we're in the second week session, but you got an email a week ago about an appointment that the governor made to the new fire marshal of the state of Wyoming. And since I see him sitting in our midst, sometimes it's beneficial to put a face to a name or a name to a face. There's actually 3 firemen up there, which I identify with all 3 of them. And on your left facing forward, Mr. Lanny Applegate, and in the middle, our new fire marshal, Byron Matthews, if you please stand. And then to his left, or to our right, is Mr. Jerry Parker from Park County. He's the fire warden up there. If we can welcome them to the Senate and give them a big applause.
The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 36. Will the reading clerk please read in Senate File 36?
Senate File 36, Investment Funds Committee Selection Panel Amendments, sponsored by the Capital Finance Committee, an act relating to the investment of state funds, was referred to Committee Number 2, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Grew, Kinski, Salazar. No, I beg your pardon, excused, Senator Nethercott. Senator Kinski, Chairman.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report it, do so with the due pass recommendation of Senate File 36, Investment Funds Committee Selection Panel Amendments. To explain this good little bill, I call on Senator Guru.
Senator Grew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, members of the 67th. I bring you Senate File 36 on behalf of the Select Committee on Capital Finance and Investments. This bill is to do with the Investment Funds Committee and Selection Panel Amendments. As you all know, you control, and folks down the hall, control one of the 25 largest sovereign wealth funds on the planet. And now while you settle back from feeling good about that, we have a group of folks who are incredibly well-versed in helping us with this operation called the Investment Funds Committee. They serve as volunteers. They're all incredibly wealthy and are what we like to call the masters of the universe as far as investments and investment funds. They've all worked around the world and do so, like I say, as on a volunteer basis to keep Wyoming's investment funds moving and moving as well as it possibly can. These people, when this committee was put together by a former member of the executive team who now sits down on the first floor in the big office, when they put this together, they also put together a committee to appoint members to the committee. All of this was done basically on an ad hoc basis back a few years ago. And since then, we've been kind of cobbling together rules as we go on how this goes. This bill in front of you, Senate File 36, is kind of the completion of that effort. Basically, it sets out for the members of the selection committee that they are picked by the Investment Funds Committee. Each member gets to pick one. And then their duties, their powers, their terms of office, and then how, as came up a couple of years ago or a year or so ago, how if we wanted to choose one of the selection committee members as a member of the IFC, that they have to resign their office and then go through a process on their own. So basically what Senate File 36 does is cleans that up, and as you can see as you look through the bill, it provides some timeframes and just some sideboards as how this committee's put together and how they pick the Investment Funds Committee that helps us in our investment portfolio. I'd be happy to stand for any questions, but I urge your support on Senate File 36.
Question being called in the bill. Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. How does this affect the treasurer's office, this committee? That's all I have. Thank you.
Senator Grew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great question. Basically, it works like this. The IFC, of which the treasurer is a member and the chairman, sit and they advise the treasurer on investments. The treasurer then takes that advice and then forwards it to the state loan board, which is made up of the top 5 elected officials, including the treasurer, who then make the final decision. The IFC, in and of themselves, makes no decisions. They just advise the treasurer and the 5-member board that sits right over the investments on how to invest and how to do so. So that it's basically just an advisory board. And then the committee that selects them sits in on some of those meetings, and kind of watches the process as it unfolds. Then when vacancies occur, they're there to provide help to pick new members.
Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are these members on the committee, are they employed through large investment bankers, or are they mostly retired people, people outside of the sphere of influence at that point?
Senator Grew. Oh, excuse me. Senator Nethercott.
Oh, more than welcome. Another good question. Kind of all over the board, literally and figuratively. There are some retired folks. There are some active people. I do not believe there are any people who currently work for investment firms. Now, some are, some are private investors. I can think of one from my own county, who's a family member from a prominent banking family, but who is also just a member of the board that picks the IFC members. But to the best of my knowledge, there are no members that are currently being paid from a company or a firm.
Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And a follow-up to that would be, are there rules currently in place within our framework that would prohibit someone from working for one of the top, investment banking firms in the world or whatever, from kind of having undue conflict of interest or undue influence on our investment strategy? Or is it just up to us to kind of self-police?
Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it doesn't preclude the possibility from somebody from sitting on the IFC, but you have to remember the function of the IFC. It's a collective board, just like we do with the retirement system. They're just there to provide advice. And so it wouldn't preclude somebody from a large investment firm. And at one time, I know we had one of those and maybe 2 of them, as my recollection, sit on there. But they are just one of a broad board. Typically, what they look at more than anything else is just asset allocation. So they're not picking stocks, bonds, private equity. They're just going to make a recommendation more than anything else on investment strategy, asset allocations. In other words, you may want to move, some of your money from equities into fixed income, or fixed income into private equity or real estate. And so that's the overall function, but I think the answer is we have had in the past members that were employed by large investment funds, but they're just one of many. They don't advise on individual funds. It's more policies and asset allocations, as I've described. So I think there's enough checks and balances in there, because they make those recommendations with the treasurers as the chairman, back to SLIB, and then any of these new members that come on there require each and every one of you to vote for them, because it requires Senate confirmation for appointments to the IFC. So there's always that check and balance to ask that question if it's a concern. In fact, I think I raised that with one of our previous appointees, that's very specific question. So I stand for any other questions, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Grew.
And Mr. Chairman, just to follow up and amplify that too, it is just one piece to a larger puzzle. We also have a paid company that actually does the main part of our investment strategy and advice. A company that's a well-known national firm that's hired by the top 5 elected officials and works through the treasurer's office to also provide, and they too provide a great deal of information. So once again, it's many pieces to a puzzle to put together, including the Investment Funds Committee itself that gets reports. We don't necessarily give all that much advice, but we definitely are in the room, and I think we actually have a member who's on the Investment Funds Committee himself, so there you go.
Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a follow-up question. Has the treasurer weighed in on this bill, or does anybody know, has he been to committee on this and what his opinion is of the bill? Thank you.
Senator Kinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill is the result of an interim study by the Capital Finance and Investments Committee. This bill could go down, and it does not affect the existence of the selection panel nor the Investment Funds Committee. That's been in place for years now. What the study group found is there was some cleanup that was needed. So this is purely a cleanup bill. So if you'll go with me to page 2, lines 7 and 8, it's simply providing that when there's a vacancy, the next appointment must be within 60 days after it becomes vacant, just to clarify the statute. Then down on, it's not being changed, but I do want to direct your direction to 19, 20, and 21, where it states the investment panel consists of 5 members composed of 1 member appointed by each of the members of the board. So the treasurer, in fact, appoints one of the members of the board. So the treasurer is involved actively in this process. Then on page 3, lines 3 to 8, again, we see we insert a deadline of 60 days to try and fill a selection vacancy. And then line 10 and 11, they found that there's no provision for a chairman, which means the group can kind of be listless until they actually elect somebody to act as the chief executive of the board. And so that's that. And then finally, conflict of interest, lines 17 to 21. If you're on the selection panel and you want to be on the Investment Funds Committee, you have to resign from the selection panel. You can't be on the panel that picks the people for the job that you're applying for. And it's not in the statute. It has happened once. I believe that person did step down, and they simply want to get it into the books. As to the specific feelings of the treasurer on this bill, I cannot say. I have no reason to believe he would be opposed to it. But if we make it to second reading, one of us will reach out to the treasurer and give you some feedback. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The treasurer does attend most of the Capital Finance and Investment Committee meetings throughout the interim, is well aware of the work that we work on, and we have heard no objections from the treasurer concerning this bill. Again, I think if you look carefully at what the bill does and probably doesn't do, it's really not that profound. It really is a cleanup bill in order to identify how long they have to replace a vacancy on the board of which the treasurer is a member of. And so it's probably not that profound or worth the amount of attention we're giving to it now today. Certainly questions about the IFC are important, and it's a very important function to our investments, but we heard no objections throughout the interim or in front of the Joint Appropriations or the Senate Appropriations Committee here this week.
Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Nethercott's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 36, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 36 is passed the Committee of the Whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 69. Would the reading clerk please read in Senate File 69?
Senate File 69, Electronic Records Retention, sponsored by Senator Nethercott, an act relating to courts, was referred to Committee Number 1, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Case, Cooper, Furphy, Landon, and Schuler. Senator Landon, Chairman.
Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I would move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, to do so with a do pass recommendation on Senate File 69, Electronic Records Retention. There are no amendments. I would ask that you call on the good Laramie County Senator Nethercott for an explanation of the bill. Thank you.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good senators, the judiciary is moving fast into the modern age. What this bill does is it updates the record retention statutes from microfiche. It's fun to say. We don't get to do that very often anymore. Microfilm and microfiche to scanning and digitizing and digital records. That really is it. The court clerks across the state are required to maintain the court files, and this identifies statutorily that microfilm, which is what's required to do now, is not the best medium for that, and really just updates the statute to recognize the digital age of which we're in. With that, I'm happy to stand for questions.
For the discussion? Oh. Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. How long does, if we didn't change anything, the courts have these physical papers and then, transfer them to microfiche? How long do they usually hang on to that before they dispose of them? Is that all written in the Supreme Court rules?
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is written in the Supreme Court rules. It's promulgated by rules in consultation with the courts. They keep those records for a matter of years, but really because they're in paper, it consumes a great deal of storage space. And so they do move them out pretty rapidly, but all of those files are available with state archives for a period of time. They never go away. So they do exist in perpetuity. It's just the manner and method for which they're stored in perpetuity.
Further discussion? Are you ready for the question? All those in favor of Senators Landon's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, to do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 69, say aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 69 has passed the Committee of the Whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 14. Would the reading clerk please read in Senate File 14?
Senate File 14, Wyoming National Guard Professional Malpractice Liability, sponsored by the Transportation Committee, an act relating to the Wyoming National Guard, was referred to Committee Number 8, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Boner, Brennan, Furphy, Kolb, and Pappas. Senator Boner, Chairman.
Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have privilege of the floor really quick before you move that bill. Yes, okay. So just an announcement, ladies and gentlemen, the Transportation Committee is going to head off and do our committee meeting after Senate File 18. That's our last transportation bill. So just a notice to the members of this body as well as members of the public, we'll be doing our previously announced meeting after we get done with Senate File 18. So hopefully everybody has proper notice. We can have a good, efficient committee meeting at that point. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. So with that being said, I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, I do so with a favorable recommendation on Senate File 14. And to explain this bill, we have the Senator from Albany County.
Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a simple little bill, but very important to the National Guard. So basically, what we're doing is if you look at page 1 of the bill, at the bottom on line 14, Basically, what we're doing is changing from holding harmless and indemnifying just attorneys or doctors of medicine. And what we're opening that up is to anyone who possesses a license or credentials to practice a profession and who meets the requirements of the Wyoming National Guard for practice in the profession. Let me give you a couple of examples. What this is saying is they want to open it up to anyone such as architects, engineers, as well as attorneys and doctors. What they're trying to do is attract those professions to the National Guard. And that's very important to them. But the professions are very concerned, for example, if they're required to go overseas, they're concerned about what their liability insurance is going to cover in that instance. So what this is saying is the state will cover them when they're performing National Guard duties. And that's basically the bill. I'll try to answer any questions.
Further discussion? Are you ready for the question? All those in favor of Senator Boner's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report it, do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 14, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 14 is passed the committee of the whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 71. Will the reading clerk please read in Senate File 71?
Senate File 71, State Loan and Bond Program, sponsored by the Appropriations Committee, an act relating to state public purpose investments, was referred to Committee Number 2, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. I, Senators Anderson, Guru, Kinski, and Salazar. Excused, Senator Nethercott. Senator Kinski, Chairman.
Senator Kinski.
Mr. Chairman, I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 71. And for a explanation of this fine piece of legislation, I will defer to Senator Guru.
Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, I bring you Senate File 71. This bill is a very important piece of legislation. Once again, another piece to the suite of bills that your Joint Appropriations Committee and Capital Finance is bringing to you to help our investment portfolio. Basically what it does, as you walk through this bill, and I'll walk you through it, it takes each of the state loan departments that our SLIB board has, that our 5 elected officials loan out, and basically does this. If you turn to page 2, rates of return, rates of investment, length of loan, and amount. Line 7, or actually line 8, it's like which change the amount of loans from those preceding languages struck and then add shall be equal to the yield on the United States Treasury security of the same duration of the loan, whether the money is loaned upon amortization plan or otherwise. Next new language, the board may add an additional percentage not to exceed 2% as a risk premium on the interest rate established under this subsection. The rate of interest for all farm loans shall not be less than 3%. If you go through this bill, you'll see each of the different sections of loans that go out to cities and towns all track this same language. The reason why is simple. A year ago, if you wanted to get a mortgage on your home, you could pay 2.75, somewhere around 3%. Today, that's 6%. Same thing happens with the state when it loans money. If we keep a fixed amount in this bill, as we've done in the past, it doesn't track with reality and what's happening in the markets at any moment. What this bill does is ties the two together. And so as the markets move, as loan interests move, the state interest rate moves along with it. As you go, just go on to page 3. It also talks about lowering the amount of funds that can be invested in each of these loan funds by the state. I also sent a handout around that it should be in your inbox right now. And basically what this is about is by changing these amounts, it gives the treasurer and the investment funds, the state investment funds folks, the 5 elected officials, the ability to take more dollars and invest at a higher return. If you look on the handout, I circled 2 numbers. One is the statutory allotment in each of the funds that's laid out in this legislation, and the amount of money that has to be set aside, $796,923,577. If you look over 2 lines at the other circled number, the funds available in each of these loans funds is $694,664,000. The point is, to have those funds available for loan, they have to be an investment vehicle that's fairly liquid. We call that, as we were talking earlier, the opportunity cost of having that money available. If you look and see that not that much money has been loaned out, and that middle number, 102 million. So the effort here is to try to give more money, take more money out of these accounts in the liquid portion, put more in the total return portion, so we can make more money. Today, 1 out of every $4 in our general fund comes from investment income. What this bill does is try to improve upon that. As you go through, continuing back through the bill, you'll see that it does that again in loans to political subdivisions. Still, the funds are available, and the state can still set those funds as needed. The question is just allowing some of those dollars to be invested in the total return. Once again, if you turn to page, it just keeps talking about this on page 7 for the loans to cities and towns. And then as you get on, you'll see that it does take a couple of spots and take some loan dollars out of the mix as far as what it can do starting April 1st, 2023. You're talking now on page 10, student dormitory capital construction loans. It puts a sunset date on those. There are other vehicles for those loans to occur. And so once again, we're just trying to maximize the dollars that can be available to the treasurer, his team, and the state election or investment board to invest. I'd be happy to answer any questions regarding this fine piece of legislation.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I do have a couple of questions. First of all, I really appreciate the work of CapFin on trying to get more of what is effectively languishing funds in our agency pool into better investments, and this is a good vehicle for that. But I do have a couple of questions. The first is with regard to the Student Dormitory Loan Fund, which I think that's about 5 years ago or 6 years ago. That was a series of requests from our community colleges, and I think there were a couple of projects that they were looking at for those funds. And I guess I haven't heard, Mr. Chairman, about those projects and whether those projects are coming to a conclusion or whether there's still outstanding demand. So do we know, and I don't know if CapFin knows or if anyone out here knows, since it looks like they're being sunsetted, if that's a full sunset of the program, is there still demand on those funds? That's the first question. The second question is with regard to the numbers that we had here, where you've got $700 million of funds available and an indication that because those funds are technically available, they have to have high liquidity. I didn't get a sense of what that looks like after this legislation passes, where some of those funds are shifted into perhaps equities or other investments to have a higher yield. How much of that $700-ish million ends up being somewhat less liquid, but more available for real investment.
Senator Larson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I have to say I'm happy that Joint Appropriations brought this. I know the Ag Committee has discussed how to figure out to lower the rates so they could actually be used on definitely for beginning farmers that have a tough time getting loans, but also on farmers that might have a disaster or something. But glad to see that the interest rates are coming down where they can be used. And I think it's a good bill. Thanks.
Senator Kinski.
Mr. Chairman, the question from my colleague from the Ivory Tower was about the increase that we might expect if this bill is enacted. So the PMTF has a long-term rate of return of between 5 and 6%, depending on the time series that you pick, whereas a short-term instrument is going to be 1% or less. So you take that delta and apply it to, just shy of $1 billion, and you have some significant money. The other thing I think that's important on this is the fact that these loans are out of the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund. 1975, the voters of the state of Wyoming adopted an amendment, constitutional amendment, that created the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund, and that says it's permanent and it's inviolate. Means we cannot reach in there and appropriate money out of that fund. But if you're earning 6% on that money and you loan money to somebody at 1%, what happened to that 5%? It belongs to the people of the state of Wyoming. So as a policy matter, should we really be making subpar low interest loans out of the PMTF when the people have said we're not supposed to be able to get in there and monkey with it? It looks like monkey business to me. It really does. And that's one of the reasons that I'm so happy to have this bill come forward. I think if we're going to make loans out of the PMTF, they ought to earn at least what we're earning on all the other investments, and that's the net of the bill. With respect to the sunsetting on some of these programs, there hasn't been an application for quite a while. I know for a couple reasons. One, the local infrastructure bill, $200 million, and the local roads bill, $200 million that we did at the Jonah Center, I expected a massive draw on that as cities and towns, work to build infrastructure with a low interest loan. But guess what? Everybody's really pretty much hooked on grants. So we just did not get a whole lot of draw on those. I think the people that were interested have drawn on them. And so because those numbers are so big, we're sunsetting them. Thank you.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, I think to answer my colleagues, I just run through the bill and did some math. So the way I read the math, it frees up about $240 million that currently has a public purpose. These become unrestricted, $40 million roughly that would be available for potential higher rate of return investments by the Treasurer's Office.
Senator Guerrero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to close this out, and thank you for doing that math for me, Mr. Majority Floor Leader, because I was doing it and I was around. As I was doing Lander math, I was a little different, but it was pretty close. The bottom line, members of the 67th, we hear a lot about the term run government like a business. This bill does that. This bill, as a business person myself, I can tell you, this bill will track like a business would want to track. These are your investments. They're all of our investments. And this tracks them like a business. I urge your support. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Since there's no further discussion, all those in favor of Senator Kinski's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report it, do so with a favorable recommendation, that's Senate File 71, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 71 has passed the Committee of the Whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 26. Would the reading clerk please read in Senate File 26?
Senate File 26, Psychology Interjurisdictional Compact, sponsored by the Labor Committee, an act relating to professional licensing, was referred to Committee Number 10, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Barlow, and Dockstader. No, Senator Bouchard and Hutchings. Senator Baldwin, Chairman.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the committee of whole rises to report, to do so with a favorable recommendation on Senate File 26 and cast a do pass vote. For explanation of the bill, I turn to myself. If you can find my light. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Proceed.
Veteran members of this body have seen several compacts come through. We've done several for physicians and for advanced practice nurses and several others, I believe 4 or 5 at this point right now. This is a continuation. This is another compact bill. You'll see it's rather lengthy. It's 76 pages long. These are not short. They're not small half-page bills. These are long bills. And the reason for that, these are national compacts. Right now, the PsyPact, as it's called, the Psychology Interjurisdictional Compact, is current in 35 states. Several other states and most of the remaining states, it's under consideration in their legislature now. There are several keys to this. We're not going to walk through this page by page. The reason being that this compact is set so that it's identical in all of those states, eventually, hopefully all 50 states, right now in 35 states. It has to be identical so that it functions the same in each state. The key components to take away of this is a bill to improve access to healthcare or access to the psychology healthcare. In my mind, psychology, mental health, physical health, they're all tied into one. And you'll hear more bills that talk about that very thing down the road. But this improves access, particularly in two populations. Number one that comes to mind is the military population, where military families move around a lot. Whether the spouses be a licensed psychologist, whether the spouses are perhaps enrolled in some psychological program, this provides for continuum of care, as they can do telepsychology no matter where they are, if that provider is through the compact, has license in multiple states. You'll hear talk about reciprocity. Currently, psychiatric care can be given through reciprocity agreements. The difficulty with that being that reciprocity agreements, each provider has to license in each state, and agree that there are a number of states that provide reciprocity, but you have to be licensed in each one of the states. The compact provides a means for one application. If you're licensed in Wyoming and they're a compact state, then you're able to license in all those states without having to fill out applications in each individual state. What is not lost in this is the ability of Wyoming to still govern their psychiatric care, govern their practitioners. That ability remains. The standard of care does not lower. The standard of care remains the same. The Psychology Board, the state of Wyoming, still regulates that care and those who are licensed in that state, just as every other state does. When we belong to a compact, it doesn't dilute that licensure. It doesn't dilute those standards. They remain the same. So the key points are, this improves patient outcome, it improves patient accessibility to the care, and it does it through a compact. And I think compacts are quite important, and there's a few experts on this here in the room that can perhaps expound more and answer some of the questions. I would ask for support from those who heard testimony on this as we proceed forward. But I would encourage an aye vote on this, and we'll stand for questions.
Further discussion? Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too urge passage of this compact legislation. Truly, it's in the interest of all of our practitioners in this state, and even more so in our patient population that can truly benefit from the ability to bring professionals into the state. As a low population state as ours has difficulty attracting these professionals. These interstate compacts are tools that have been shown to be very effective For our practitioners here, certainly it allows a practitioner to live in Wyoming and still service people in other states. So if someone wants to live in a rural area in Wyoming because of the beauty, there's not enough people actually in those areas to allow them to practice their profession. But with interstate compacts, their scope of practice is much larger. They can have clients and patients in multiple states through this compact. So it's very good for our practitioners, but it's also good for the patients who need those services, because frankly, you might not be able to secure a practitioner in your location. So with the use of this technology through telehealth and all that, that practice can come here and service our populations that are in our more rural areas. In addition, our practitioners sometimes would need assistance in certain areas of their practice from other practitioners that are outside the state. For instance, there may be a disorder that one particular or a group of practitioners that's their specialty. Well, a local practitioner could actually get an out-of-state practitioner to get licensed very quickly, in a matter of a day, through the use of interstate compact. If you relied on reciprocity, that person would have to submit their credentials to the state, and we'd have to go through the entire licensure process. They'd have to check out their credentials, their schooling, their clinical the clinical requirements and continuing education, all of that. It's very time consuming, but with a compact, everybody who is in a compact state and wants to practice under the compact, remember, this is voluntary. You don't have to practice under the compact if you don't want to. If you do that, you only hold one license, and that's the license in your state. And then you just ask for a privilege to practice in the other compact state. And that's a matter, you pay the fee, all of the other states that are in the compact will recognize Wyoming's license, and our practitioners can easily go across state lines. So compacts are a way to be able to have license portability. That's exactly what compacts do. Now remember, anybody who practices in Wyoming has to abide by Wyoming's laws regarding whatever profession the compact is. The same way with our professionals. If they go to another compact state, say the state to the south, our practitioners would have to abide by their law. In no way does a compact change our state statutes requiring the practice. So I urge this, almost all of the, just want you to know that the associations are all behind it. I haven't found anybody yet, any practitioner yet, to tell me that this is going to be bad for their practice. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have one question, and I'm hopeful I know the answer, but it's my understanding this relates only to specific scope of practice for psychology and psychiatrists, psychologists, anything governed by the State Board of Psychology. But when we look at legislation like this, sometimes there's scope creep or narrowing of scope. So I just wanted to check in on that we're not changing anything to do with scope of practice, and that this doesn't affect any other telehealth or telemedicine, telemental health, anything along those lines. Thank you.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To answer that question, that is a good question. And the answer to that question is this deals only with that specific, doesn't change the scope of practice at all. And it deals with just that psychology through the Board of Psychology. And that's all this bill does.
Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did have quite a few questions during testimony this morning, and some of the questions were answered favorably, some of them weren't. But I thought it would be important for the body to know this bill is huge. It took me quite a bit of time this weekend to read it, and there's another one just like it. I think it's 75 pages long, or no, this is a 75-page bill. But I would like to just draw the body's attention to some things that were of concern to me, that when I asked the questions, it was like, oh, that's not what it does. Oh, it only does this, it only does that, and we can get out of it if we want. But 75 pages, I want to go through some of the things that I was concerned about. On page number 3, I could be totally wrong, but I think it's important to bring them up. Page number 3, it says the intent of the compact is to regulate the day-to-day practice of telepsychology. It's intended on line 16 to authorize the state to do this, that, and the other thing. On page 11, my biggest concern is that the compact, it says, and the amendments, let me see, have the effect of law. Let me see, that's lines 5 through 13. That concerns me. On page number 5, let me make sure I have this right. Let me see, let's go back to number 8. There were so many red flags, I was just so concerned. On page number 8, it talks about e-passports in 9 through 15, that they want to promote standardization. And when we speak of psychology, are we standardizing psychology from state to state? Once they get into these compacts, will we be kind of under the compact to follow the standardization processes of the compact? On page number 30, there was a question about, and this dealt with adverse actions. Our state can have one policy of handling the adverse action, and the compact can have another. But if we do something different than the compact, they say that we're not under the compact if we do something alternative. So I was concerned about that. On page number 49, it speaks of fees. And I was just wondering about the fees that could be levied on our state. What will those fees be? Will they continue to have these fees for as long as we are in the compact? Will they continue to rise? Will they go down? On page number 52, it mentions that the rules on line 14 and 15, that the rules and amendments that shall be made in this compact are binding. Binding on Wyoming, binding on our psychologists. For how long? What will the rules be? We only have one vote out of the number of states that are in there. Could other states overwrite our rulemaking vote? Just a concern there. The issue of getting out of the compact was a concern to me, that in order to get out of the compact, you just can't say I'm getting out. You have to actually repeal this compact that we're putting into law. And who's going to do the repealing? We don't know. So that was of concern to me. And number 65, it says on page 65, lines 7 through 10, if there is an amendment adopted, it has to be, like if Wyoming has an amendment to this compact, it has to be adopted by all the members in order for it to become a part of the compact. That was a concern to me. Then there's a database that has to be maintained on the fiscal note, and I was wondering about the cost of that. We all know that databases are costly. They constantly go up. Very rarely do they go down. So, Mr. Chairman, these were some concerns I had, and I didn't really feel that the answers satisfied me that much. One of the other things that happened was no psychologists came in to speak in favor of this. It was all the agencies. We did have one person come in to say that there may be some fear when it comes to testifying on the bill. So, Mr. Chairman, if someone can help me in regards to all these questions or just a few of them, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Senator Baldwin. Oh, Senator Brennan.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask you guys to favorably consider this bill. This bill is a bill that deals with our mental health care crisis that we have. We don't have enough providers in the state of Wyoming, and this bill addresses that. The good senator from across the state mentioned that there are 5 or 6 other compacts in the state of Wyoming. Nursing is one of those professions that has state compacts. And I would hate to think what would have happened during our COVID crisis had Wyoming not been a part of that compact for nurses. We would not have been able to get agency nurses in the state quick enough to care for our sick people. Again, this addresses a mental health care crisis that we're in the state of Wyoming. Our suicide rates are number one, I believe. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. We have to take care of the mental health of our citizens of Wyoming, and this bill does that.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To answer a couple of those questions. Number one is cost. The good senator talked about cost associated with databases, et cetera. All the costs for this compact are borne by the license fees of those. And understand here, every psychologist, everybody that practices psychology does not have to join the compact, but those that do, part of that license fee, that's where those fees are going. They're the ones that pay these fees. None of this comes out of the state funds. None of this comes out of general funds. This is all borne by those who pay that license fee. So that would answer that question. Number two is, all those things in this compact, as you read through here that talk about is binding, et cetera, all the authority of that commission, it's to the compact only. It doesn't involve them in our state governance. It doesn't involve them in our statute. It involves the compact only. What you see there in those 76 pages, that's the only jurisdiction they have. And like every other state that's in the compact, Wyoming will have a vote. And we wouldn't want any other state to adopt an amendment without our input on it. And that amendment there, again, if there are any other amendments to that compact passed, they will involve the compact only. They don't delve into the practice act of our psychology people. They don't change our standards. It was noted in the meeting this morning that the standards for psychology practice are fairly standard already. They're a PhD required. They're all fairly well closely certified in the way that they're certified in what they do. So in no way does this change any of those compact, any of those practice acts. And I find that every time we talk about these compacts, that's an issue that people are worried about. And with reason, they should be concerned. We don't want to change that practice act, and if we do that within the state. And I mean, you hear those bills once in a while here in this body. We do go into practice act, but that's not what the compact does. This compact is just a simple means to allow more people to practice within the state of Wyoming, and those people that are in the state of Wyoming to practice across the United States and in other states, thus providing more health care, more mental health care that's not available right now. It just provides us one of those tools to provide more mental health care. And as the other good senator says, we're number one in the suicide rate. And we've been there for a while. We've been there for 3 years running, and we haven't gotten out of the top 3 since I can remember. And I think that's a disgraceful number, and I want out of the top 3. I would like to get out of the top 25. But unless we take care of things like this, we're never going to get there. And there's other bills that we're going to deal with this session, and we've dealt with in past sessions that help us address those things. And I think it's important that we do address those things. So with that, I would encourage your aye votes.
Senator Dockstetter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just the only thing I'd add is this piece of legislation, similar pieces of legislation, as our healthcare providers look to expand and provide mental health services with physical health services. They see this legislation as an opportunity that opens up doors to bring some help in that they wouldn't have had otherwise. So on and for the legislation.
Sensing the Senate is very, very, very ready to vote. All those in favor of Senator Baldwin's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, do so with a favorable recommendation that Senate File 26, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 26 has passed the committee of the whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 10. Would the reading clerk please read in Senate File 10?
Senate File 10, Licensed Professional Counselor Compact, sponsored by the Labor Committee, an act relating to professions and occupations. Was referred to Committee Number 10, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Aye, Senators Baldwin, Barlow, and Dockstader. No, Senators Bouchard and Hutchings. Senator Baldwin, Chairman.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There is an amendment. Without objection, I'd like to withdraw that amendment. Say fine, please.
Accepted.
Okay. I'd like to move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, to do so with a favorable recommendation on Senate File 10 and vote favorably for an aye vote and for passage out of the Senate Committee of the Whole. And before explanation of this bill, I turn to the good senator on the front row, Senator Barlow.
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ditto. Much of what you just heard on the last bill, Mr. Chairman, applies to this bill. I will be clear that this is a different part of a professional practice that is licensed in the state of Wyoming. This is licensed professional counselors, also in Title 33. Also, obviously, a mental health related profession. This bill goes through many of the same things. The majority of the body is the compact itself. The compact now has 17 states that have joined in it, including 3 neighboring states, Utah, Colorado, Nebraska, and it's under consideration in North Dakota, as it, of course, here is in Wyoming as well. And the Section 2 of the bill, of course, has to do with conforming amendments that bring it into our statutes. Now, bringing into acknowledging in our statute is not the same thing as adjusting our Practice Act to the question that came from over the mountain. Are we making changes to the Practice Act? And absolutely not. What we're doing is acknowledging that the practitioners in Wyoming can, if this are adopted by the legislature, can participate within this compact at their election, but it does not change the laws of Wyoming regarding to scope of practice. So quite honestly, quite clearly, Mr. Chairman, this is about access for patients. This is about accountability for quality of care. And ladies and gentlemen, I think all the other comments, if there's specific comments about, or questions about this compact, they all lie, most of those responses lie within what you heard in the previous discussion of that similar compact. So I'd be glad to stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to say ditto on my comments on this bill as well. Thank you.
Senator Pappas.
And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to say ditto on all my comments. It's well worth our while to allow this compact to go forward.
Sensing the floor is ready for a vote. All those in favor of Senator Baldwin's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 10, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. Senate File 10 is passed the Committee of the Whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 18. Will the reading clerk please read in Senate File 18?
Senate File 18, Benefits for Spouses of Law Enforcement Members, sponsored by the Transportation Committee, an act relating to administration of the government. Was referred to Committee Number 8, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Boner, Brennan, Furphy, Kolb, and Pappas. Senator Boner, Chairman.
Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, do so with a favorable recommendation on Senate File 18. For explanation of the bill, I refer to my colleague from Albany County.
Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What we've got before us is benefits for spouses and children for Highway Patrol troopers who are killed during duty. That's a tough issue to deal with. But what's happening, interesting in our state, we've got two separate benefit programs. We have one program that's designed for policemen and sheriffs. Then we've got another benefit program designed for highway troopers, wardens, and DCI. Well, guess what? They don't line up appropriately. The police and sheriffs have a better program than our highway troopers have. Well, what's happening is a lot of the troopers are being hired away by the police departments and sheriff's departments. So what this bill is trying to do is equate the two programs. So we'll hopefully quit losing troopers. So what I would like to do is basically go ahead and run through the bill now. It's pretty straightforward. It looks a little complicated, but it's pretty straightforward. So if you look at the bill on page 1, lines 2 through 4 is what we're after, is amending death benefits for the law enforcement retirement plan in the state highway patrol, game and fish wardens, and criminal investigators. So if you go to page 2.
Excuse me,
While we're
Senator Furphy. Excuse me, Senator Furphy. Can we have quiet behind the chamber area? Continue, Senator Furphy.
Okay, page 2 of the bill, line 5. So what we're talking about is surviving spouse of an officer, and then there are 3 sections, and I'm going to go through them very quickly. Romanet I is for those who die in the scope of employment to receive a monthly death benefit. And what it's adding is they can have one or the other. 62.5% of their salary going to the spouse, or 2.5% of the officer's salary multiplied by years of service. To equate the two, that's 25 years of service. So if they're providing service beyond 25 years, it's a benefit for them to take the lower. If you go to Romanet 2, it's for those who die outside the scope of employment. So they're not doing their duty at the time, but they pass away. What they get is 50% of the officers' salaries. And here's a big difference between policemen and troopers. What we're proposing is that the children, surviving children, get 6% of the salary on top of what the spouse gets. Then Romanet 3 covers those who retired under the program, but they're still doing some work for the highway patrol, et cetera. And so increasing the benefits there. I'm not going to go through the whole program, but basically what it does again is equates what the policemen are getting and sheriff with the troopers. So I'll stop there and try to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm trying to understand how this works and how it would be constitutional and how it would relate to Article 3, Section 36, which is prohibited appropriations. No appropriation shall be made for charitable, industrial, education, or benevolent purposes to any person, corporation, or community not under the absolute control of the state, nor to any denomination or sectarian institution or association. I can understand the great desire to do this, but I'm not sure how our Constitution allows it to be done. And I'm sure that people have looked at it and then they might be a way, but I'm not seeing that. So please help me if you can, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess my query to the last Constitution query is, it seems like we already have this program. And what this does is it modifies it. So I guess maybe there has been a determination by a previous legislature this was acceptable. So what would be incorrect about the modifications that I believe this is proposing? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Purpey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, the constitutional issue, I don't know. I assume the Appropriations Committee struggled with that because this bill was referred to them. So hopefully it is not an issue. And the other question, Senator Barlow, was pertaining to the benefits. I'm sorry, I'm confused. What? Okay.
Further discussion? Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, it's just a fair question. You know, there's situations where if you have a pension and you're not able to have that, you die before that pension is played out, it goes to the spouse. Social Security works that way for part of it, for part of the benefits. So maybe that the previous program followed something like that, but it was a pension that they'd paid into, so it didn't come under the Constitution. I don't know. I'm only speculating, but I say there's a constitutional question here that, in my mind, and maybe we could get that addressed and come back on second reading. I'm not trying to hold this up, I'm not trying to kill this today, but I have questions.
Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I do think that's a fair question. Certainly we can look into that and do everything we can to find the answer to the senator from Fremont County. I will say this, there are other pools of state employees who do receive a modest death benefit. I know that in the community college system, for example, there is a modest death benefit if you are killed in the line of duty. This is an entirely different area, and appreciate the explanation by the senator from Albany County. You did a great job. We spent quite a bit of time on this. We're kind of under siege out there with our state troopers, Mr. Chairman. We are struggling. At last count, I think we're down 38 troopers out across the state of Wyoming. And so we endeavored to do whatever we could to take a look at that and to make this recommendation to the state Senate. This is one that would bring them up to an equal status with other law enforcement agents. And quite honestly, I think it is a policy discussion, and maybe it does come back to the constitutional issue. I think that's been resolved, but we'll find that out. Aside from that, I think it's just good policy for us to take care of those folks. Friday night, we'll be driving home, many of us. It'll be snowing and blowing, and I almost assure you that somebody is going to run across one of our troopers helping somebody out of the borrow pit somewhere. It's really hazardous duty, and I think it's a good policy decision. I hope you'll support the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
First, Senator Biteman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wondering about what the testimony was from the retirement system and their actuaries as to what effect they would have on our Wyoming retirement system, and what if there was a mass casualty event with multiple troopers at the same time, what that might do to our retirement system account, and how we account for that, if there was any testimony or discussion on that.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, I'll reverse the order of the discussion, but to my colleague over there, if you turn to the fiscal note, WRS did run the fiscal profile on that. Has an estimated increase of expenditures of about $8,400 a year. You can read that. I hope that answers that question. So the question of constitutionality under Article 3, Section 36. This pertains to those entities outside the absolute control of the state. These are state employees. With the Wyoming Highway Patrol, Game and Fish, and DCI are employees of the state. They are in direct control by the state. I don't think there's any constitutional violation or prohibition on Article 3, Section 36. When you read that, it says, prohibited appropriations. No appropriation shall be made for charitable, industrial, education, or benevolent purposes to any person, corporation, and community not under the absolute control of the state. Mr. Chairman, these people are under the absolute control of the state, so I just don't see a constitutional issue with this bill as it's currently structured. Thank you.
Senator Purpey. Well then, Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, I do understand that the deceased person, the officer, is an employee of ours. It's the spouse that gets the benefits. So, but if this is totally retirement funds, they're not necessarily state funds. So that could be the out here. But could we just get somebody to look at it and to come tomorrow? I'm really not trying to drag this out. There's got to be a key to that.
Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to be clear, this is a part of the Wyoming retirement system. To make that, we got the answer right now. So hopefully that answers that particular inquiry.
Are you ready for the question? All those in favor of Senator Boner's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 18, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 18 is passed the committee of the whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 31. Would the reading clerk please read in Senate File 31? Senator Cooper.
Privilege of the floor, please.
Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got two things I'd like to talk to you real quickly about. One is, if you look up here in the back gallery, where'd he go? He was here just a second ago. Well, I want to talk to you about him. There's a gentleman up there with a haircut just about like mine. There he is over here. This is the chief of the Sublette County Unified Fire District. It's my nephew, Chad Cooper.
Here, here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secondly, you see a whole flurry of judicial bills here that came through this morning, and they're pretty exciting bills. Most of them they're all cleanup bills for the department, for the Judiciary Department, and they're really important bills, but they're not terribly exciting, and they take a lot of time to put together and bring forward. And speaking for the Judiciary Committee, we'd like to thank Senator Nethercott for the work she did on these to keep our committee up, working with the judicial branch and making sure we're getting things done properly. Thank you, sir.
You're here. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 31. Would the reading clerk please read in Senate File 31?
Senate File 31, Adjacent Land Resource Data Trespass Repeal, sponsored by the Judiciary Committee, an act relating to crimes and offenses. Was referred to Committee Number 1, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Case, Cooper, Furphy, Landon, and Schuler. Senator Landon, Chairman.
Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And to second what was just said by the good senator from the Bighorn Basin, very much aware of the shoes that I have to fill. Many of us, I no doubt, feel that way going into this session. Lots of great work has been done by the Judiciary Committee over the last 4 years, all the justice reform. I believe you've served on that committee, Mr. Chairman, and so thank you to all of those who brought forth bills like this one. Mr. Chairman, I would move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report it, do so with a due pass recommendation on Senate File 31, Adjacent Land Resource Data Trespass Repeal. And for an explanation of the bill, I would ask that you call on Senator Case.
Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to do this. I'm under close scrutiny here from the best in the business. I'm very grateful for as well. Mr. Chairman, a few years ago, we had a bill about trespassing to collect data. And the language that we put in is a person who trespasses to unlawfully collect resource data, or a person who unlawfully collects resource data, or a person who trespasses to access adjacent or proximate land under this section. That was the bill we had. So it made it a trespass to collect data, but the tweak that was in it that kind of got us in a little bit of trouble, Mr. Chairman, was it made it a trespass against the land that you cross when you were collecting the data from the public land likely next door. I guess it could be private land. But the trespass, we made it a trespass against crossing the private land. Well, that ran through the courts, and we didn't do that well with that one, Mr. Chairman. We kind of got our clock cleaned, and the issue rose up to be a First Amendment right. That's what the court ruled. The collecting data and publishing the data is a form of First Amendment freedom of speech, and that our law had interfered with freedom of speech. And this is the end. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. I'm not sure it did go to the Supreme Court, but I remember there was an opportunity to appeal, and at that point the state said no. They were beat, we were whooped. That was the opinion of the Attorney General. And Mr. Chairman, we lost that one. The court ruled, so this bill conforms our law to the ruling of the court and deletes the language "or a person who trespasses to access adjacent or proximate land." That's the purpose of the bill. It's cleanup. We want our laws to, when people look at our laws, we want them to reflect the state of the law. And the state of the law is that that clause doesn't exist. So, Mr. Chairman, that's a bill. I'll do my best to answer any questions. I've also got a good friend that sits right next to me that might be able to help us if we have to, but thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could I be given an example of what exactly is going on with this when you talk about crossing over, violating freedom of speech? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, I'll do my very best, but we do have the ACOR in the background. But so there are folks that collect data about quality of the environment, quality of streams, water quality, whatever, and they publish that data. They issue discussion about that publication, that quality of that stream, and what, say, the policy remedies might be, whether different practices are polluting that stream, on and on and on. But in this case, to get that data, they would have crossed private land. They may have had permission to cross private land, but not permission to cross private land to get data from the public land. It's kind of odd. It may not be a trespass, but only because of the data collection aspect on the adjacent land. And that's what our law said. You know, the trespass occurs because you cross the private land to gather data on some other land. And we were pretty upset about that, and we wanted to stop that practice. And so I hope that helps. I'm sure there are a lot of other examples. There is a very prominent environmental group that has pursued this and pursued it vigorously through the courts, and that was probably the ones we were trying to get, and we lost. And so the state of the law is that this language doesn't exist. So we're cleaning up our statutes to match the state of the law. I hope that's helpful. Next time, if I get the same question, I'm yielding to the best friend I ever had.
Further discussion? All those in favor of Senator Landon's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report to do so with favorable recommendation of Senate File 31, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Senate File 31 is passed the committee of the whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 25. Will the reading clerk please read in Senate File 25?
Senate File 25, District and Prosecuting Attorneys Bar License Requirement, sponsored by the Judiciary Committee, an act relating to district and county and prosecuting attorneys. Was referred to Committee Number 1, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Case, Cooper, Furphy, Landon, and Schuler. Senator Landon, Chairman.
Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with a do pass recommendation on Senate File 25, District and Prosecuting Attorneys Bar License Requirement. For an explanation of the bill, I'd ask that you go clear over to the southwest to the great senator from Evanston. Thank you.
Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This might be the easiest, most simple, quickest bill of the day. Of course, you know, when you say that, that's never going to work out that way. But if you take a look at this bill, District and Prosecuting Attorneys Bar License Requirement in the very first page, lines 2 through 5, it pretty much tells you what the bill is all about. It requires each district attorney and county prosecuting attorney to be a licensed attorney and a member in good standing, that's the key here, with the Wyoming State Bar during the term of office. So I just sort of assumed that's kind of what we always did with them. But apparently they're on the second page, the key there is on line 6, they have to be a member in good standing of the Wyoming State Bar throughout the term of office in which they were elected or appointed. And apparently we've had some issues in the past. And so that's why this bill, we're bringing this bill to you today. Again, it's mentioned again down on line 16, again, they've got to be a member in good standing with the bar. And that's really all it is. There's nothing, you know, nefarious or anything else about it. It's just that there were some issues in the past. And apparently we need to make sure that all of our attorneys, whether they're district attorneys or county prosecuting attorneys, they're licensed and they are in good standing with the state bar. With that, I would ask for your aye vote and answer any questions if I can.
Further discussion? Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Landon's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 25, say aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 25 has passed the Committee of the Whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 95. Would the reading clerk please read in Senate File 95?
Senate File 95, Moon Landing Day, sponsored by Senator Ellis, an act relating to legal time and holidays, was referred to Committee Number 9, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Cooper, Dockstader, Ellis, Jones, and Rothfuss. Senator Dockstader, Chairman.
Senator Dockstader?
Thank you. We need to find the person who will present, but let's jump into this anyway. Mr. Chairman, I move, I recommend that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, that it do so with a favorable motion of Senate File 95. To explain the bill, Senator Ellis, if we can find her. May I suggest that we just move on to the next one for a moment, but we'll take one more quick scan.
We just move on to 55 then?
Senator Ellis, the floor is yours.
Senator Ellis.
Mr. Chairman, the Eagle has landed. Question. Mr. Chairman, I apologize. I'm guessing the bill has been read in and moved. Is that correct?
Accept the amendment. Okay, move the
The
amendment.
Standing Committee, has that been read in? If not, I'd ask that it be read in.
Senate File 95, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 2, line 6, delete.
I move Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 95. But colleagues, let me first explain the moon landing bill, and then we'll get to the Standing Committee Amendment. Years ago, actually for several years, you may be aware that our country is involved in kind of a national dialogue. Columbus Day has been on the books. It's often celebrated in the month of October. But in recent years, a number of Native American groups have come forward and said, and questioned the appropriateness of celebrating Christopher Columbus. Arguments tend to highlight the fact, and question whether or not this individual actually discovered the Americas. As you know, the continent was already inhabited by Native people. And there were questions about the motive of why our country celebrates Christopher Columbus. And so in thinking about this, one response I've often heard talks about discovery. And so in thinking about issues and trying to reframe the dialogue a little bit, I did some research and I looked into our existing statutes. And surprisingly, I found that we already have a Native American Day on the books. It's celebrated in May each year. But when I think about discovery, Mr. Chairman, I really think that there's one instance in American history and the history of mankind that has been overlooked for too long, and that has to do with landing on the moon. As you know, on July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong and Edwin Buzz Aldrin became the first human beings to land and walk on the moon. For people in my generation, this event occurred before I was born, and I sometimes think we take it for granted. It's remarkable to think that since the time the Wright brothers first took flight, from 50 years from that point in time, we had put individuals and human beings on the moon. Unlike Columbus, who was looking for trade routes and looking for colonization opportunities, when we went to the moon, Mr. Chairman, we were looking going there for scientific purposes. We wanted to better understand our place in the universe. We simply didn't sling a human being out there and hope they would come home. This involved serious planning by our nation's top experts in sciences and STEM, and all the STEM fields. And so, Mr. Chairman, that's what this bill would do. It's trying to reframe this discussion that has been going on the national level and just really commemorate a holiday that is uniquely American and encourages our kids to start really appreciating what it means to be in space and for space travel. In addition to that, I've become aware that there are industries in Wyoming, one in Campbell County in particular, that actually provides products for NASA for future exploration missions. And so the bill starts on page 1. It would establish Moon Landing Day on July 20th, 1969. Going on to page 2, paragraph B, this would require the governor in advance of July 20th each year to issue a proclamation requesting observance of moon landing. And then finally, the last section said that this will not affect any commercial paper, the making or execution of agreements, judicial proceedings, or authorized days off. And with that, I'd offer the standing committee amendment, which would be on page 2, line 6. We've had conversations in this body about the appropriateness of the legislature requiring the governor to take certain action. So it would permissively say the governor may instead of shall, in advance of July 20th, issue a proclamation. So with that, if there are any questions about the standing committee amendment, if not, I'd ask for the question.
Are you ready for the question? Those in favor of Senator Dockstetter's motion to adopt Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to Senate File 95, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The motion to adopt Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to Senate File 95 has passed. We are back on the bill. Senator.
That's the bill, Mr. Chairman. Happy to answer any additional questions.
Are you ready for the question? Oh, I guess it's not quite yet. Senator Pike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not to nitpick or anything, but was curious as to why poor Michael Collins got left off of the list there. He's the guy that drove him back and forth to the moon and played a very important role in this mission. There's 3 of them. I think he probably should get some love in this bill. So maybe on second reading, we could possibly add him to the list. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are you ready? Oh, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think being over-inclusive is a wonderful thing, and really the goal is to get people knowledgeable. The more generations that pass, I just don't want us taking for granted the marvelousness of what's happening, and even looking forward as we're talking about missions to Mars and we're retrieving all these images from space right now. It really is an amazing feat. So I think any amendments of those sort would be very appropriate.
Ready for the question? All those in favor of Senator Dockstetter's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 95, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Senate File 95 is passed the Committee of the Whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 55. With the reading clerk, please read in Senate File 55.
Senate File 55, Chancery Court Vacancies Extension Amendment, sponsored by Senator Nethercott, an act relating to courts. Was referred to Committee Number 1, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Case, Cooper, Furphy, Landon, and Schuler. Senator Landon, Chairman.
Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with a do pass recommendation on Senate File 55, Chancery Court Vacancies Extension Amendment. For an explanation of this fine little bill, I would ask that you call on Senator Nethercott. Thank you.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good senators, as you recall, in 2019, the legislature created the Wyoming Chancery Court. In December of 2021, that court was operational. Recognizing that being a new court, it would not have a full docket or caseload, rather than appointing a full-time judge to preside over that court with potentially no cases, we were fortunate to have members of the district court bench volunteer to serve as judges in that courtroom until the docket in the Chancery Court became voluminous enough to justify an exclusive judge on the Chancery Court. You will be pleased to know that since December of 2021, which is a little over a year now, there's been between 13 to 15 cases filed within the Chancery Court. The court does have its own exclusive rules and is exclusively electronic filing as well. But as a result of having about 15 cases, which should be noted is consistent with other states and their same process for establishing Chancery courts and usage of those courts. So everything is where it should be and everyone is feeling success regarding that, but probably a little premature to have a judge assigned exclusively to that court. And so I know this body cares about fiscal conservatism. We are asking to extend the appointment of a full-time judge committed to the Chancery Court until 2025, continuing to allow for those district court judges to serve in that capacity, saving all of the taxpayers' money, and still providing that very profound service to our citizens of this state. Thank you.
Further discussion? Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Landon's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report to do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 55, say aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 55 has passed the committee of the whole. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, that clears the desk. Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee of the whole rise and report.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Motion carried.
Reading clerk, reading the report, please.
Mr. President, your committee of the whole, having had under considerations bills on general file, begs leave to report as follows. Senate File 37, do pass amended. Senate File 15, do pass. Senate File 32, do pass amended. Senate File 36, do pass. Senate File 69, do pass. Senate File 14, do pass. Senate File 71, do pass. Senate File 26, do pass. Senate File 10, do pass. Senate File 18, do pass. Senate File 31, do pass. Senate File 25, do pass. Senate File 95, do pass amendment. Senate File 55, do pass. Senator Kolb, Chairman.
Senator Kolb.
Senator Dockstader, Acting President, I move that the adoption of the Committee of the Whole report.
Heard the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Heard the motion. Okay, the report has been adopted. We have standing committee reports and messages from the House to be read in. So let's go ahead and read those in at this point.
Thank you.
January 16, 2023, Mr. President, your Committee Number 4, Education, to whom is referred Senate File 84, Education Model Student Attendance Policies, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Beitman, Brennan, Rothfuss, Scott, and Steinmetz. Senator Scott, Chairman. January 16, 2023, Mr. President, your Committee Number 4, Education, to whom is referred Senate File 51, School Finance Regional Cost Adjustment, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Beitman, Brennan, Scott, and Steinmetz. No, Senator Rothfuss. Senator Scott, Chairman. January 16, 2023, Mr. President, your Committee Number 1, Judiciary, to whom was referred Senate File 99, Witnessing of Wills, Remote Methods, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Case, Cooper, Furphy, Landon, and Schuler. Senator Landon, Chairman. Messages from the House. From the House of Representatives, message number 101, January 16, 2023. Mr. President, House Bill number 13 passed the House on third reading. Ayes 61, excused 1. Message number 100, January 16, 2023. Mr. President, House Bill number 9, Juvenile Courts Concurrent Jurisdiction Clarification, passed the House on third reading in an amended form. Ayes 59, noes 2, excused 1. Message number 102, January 16, 2023. Mr. President, House Bill number 28, Community College Capital Construction, passed the House on third reading in an amended form. Ayes 48, noes 13, excused 1. Sincerely, Katie Talbot, House Chief Clerk.
Okay, thank you. Senator Steinmetz?
Thank you, Chairman Dockstader. I would request that Senate File 33, defining aircraft for purposes of hunting prohibitions, be re-referred to Committee Number 6, Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources.
Absent objection, that will be referred to Committee Number 6. All right. Mr. Floor Leader.
Mr. Past President, Senator Dockstader, I move that we stand recessed until 10 a.m. tomorrow.
Yeah.
Adjourn.
I'll go with adjourn. Thank you. Okay. Reports. Committees. Announcements, excuse me. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Past President. Your Labor and Health Committee number 10 will meet on Wednesday, January 18th at 7:30 a.m. to consider Senate File 8, Essential Subsidy Payments to Behavioral Health Centers, Senate File 79, Plan of Safe Care of Newborns, Senate File 94, Federal Indian Child Welfare Act codification. One additional announcement, tomorrow morning starts every Tuesday of the session from 7 to 7:30, something called Mindful Mindset. I just wanted to read to you a couple sentences off this announcement that was handed to me. Most of our time, our minds are wandering. That's none of us. We're thinking about the future, dwelling in the past, worrying, fantasizing, fretting, or daydreaming, which is also none of us. This is a help, give us a tool to be less stressed, calmer, and kinder to ourselves and others. Mindfulness practices and how they integrate into our everyday lives to help manage stress, increase productivity, improve our quality of life and interpersonal communications. We don't make you stand on your head or hum kumbaya, but we will teach you simple practices you can utilize daily. That's over in the top of the House chambers in room E313 at 7 a.m. till 7:30 a.m. tomorrow and each Tuesday during session.
Thank you. Announcements continuing. Senator Chairman Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of announcements. Your Judiciary Committee number 1 will meet upon adjournment, special time tomorrow afternoon to try to knock out a couple more bills and get them up here to the chamber. We will do that upon adjournment in W4 downstairs to take up Senate File 23, Treatment Courts Transfer to the Judicial Branch, and Senate File 100, Designation of Spouses, Revocation upon Divorce or Annulment. Again, that's upon adjournment tomorrow afternoon. And then on Wednesday morning, Mr. Chairman, we will take up 3 bills. Beginning at 7:30 in the morning, we'll meet in room 4 on Wednesday morning to take up Senate File 34, Trespass by Small Unmanned Aircraft. That is continued from last Friday. Senate File 54, Judges Housing Allowance, and Senate File 91, Creation of Tenancy by the Entirety.
Okay, thank you. Senator Anderson, do you have an announcement?
Mr. President, Chairman, yes, I do. Your Appropriation Committee will meet Tuesday, January 17th upon noon recess, State Capitol Room 311 or 113 and online. The bill numbers we're going to work on are Senate File 66, State Capital Construction Funding, and Senate File 97, Education Trust Fund Transfer. Also have an announcement for Tuesday, January 17th. Upon adjournment, we'll meet in 301 and online. Committee will consider the ARPA funds appropriations and the state-funded capital construction. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Case.
Senator Dockstader, Mr. Past President and Chairman, your stressed out committee number 7 will meet tomorrow morning at an extra stressy time of 7:30 a.m. And we're going to take up all the committee bills that we have on our plate. Senate File 3, Retail Liquor License Fees, Senate File 13, Bar and Grill Liquor License Amendment, Senate File 12, Tavern and Entertainment Liquor License. Then we're jumping to blockchain stuff, Mr. Past President, Senate File 75, Decentralization Autonomous Organizations Amendments, and Senate File 76, Wyoming Digital Asset Registration Act. Our goal is to get all the committee bills done tomorrow. We'll try to do. So thank you, Mr. Past President.
Judge, we'll start at 7:30. Very good. Let's move across the room to Chairman Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your committee number 5, Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources, will meet Tuesday, January 17th, 15 minutes after adjournment in the Capitol Extension Room 2 and online to consider the following bills. Senate File 27, Weed and Pest Mitigation Tribal Inclusion. Senate File 28, Livestock Infectious Disease Control Tribal Inclusion. Senate File 68, Prescriptive Easement for Water Conveyances. Senate File 96, Omnibus Water Bill Planning and Administration. Senate File 82, Eligible Water and Sewer Projects Funding as time permits.
Okay, good schedule. Chairman Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Past President / Chairman. Senate Committee number 6, the TRW, Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources, will meet tomorrow at 8 o'clock, W002. We'll discuss Senate File 88, Hunting Licenses, Weighted Bonus Points System, and Senate File 56, Prohibiting Travel Across Private Land for Hunting Purposes.
Thank you. Any more announcements? All right. Heard the motion then. We'll stand adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow, 10 o'clock.